Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Sign in at the end of the world. Devour the Fire Lord at the beginning. Chapter 1. Blue Star. In a certain city in China, the once prosperous streets have now become dilapidated, scrapped and damaged vehicles are randomly discarded on the roadside, and there are still old blood stains on the road. A gust of breeze blew up several old plastic bags, bringing proof of human activities to this city that had long lost its vitality. Roar. Several zombies in ragged clothes and hideous faces were wandering on the side of the street. Their dull and empty eyes were covered with bloodshot eyes, and their hands kept stretching in the air. After being mutated and infected into zombies, they no longer need to use their eyes to search for prey. They rely on their eyes. It's a keen sense of smell and flexible hearing. Suddenly, a zombie seemed to smell something and suddenly raised its head. Puff! The next moment, its head shattered in an instant. In an instant, blood spattered like rain, and the blood was everywhere. The smell of blood instantly attracted a group of zombies around him. A large wave of zombies came one after another, and a flash of blood was seen, accompanied by a terrifying roar from far to near. Roar, poof, more blood spattered in the air, dyeing the dim street red. Upon closer inspection, the bloody light turned out to be a huge zombie monster that was several meters tall and covered in blood. The blood-red zombies jumped ferociously onto the scrapped car, and then jumped away quickly, leaving behind broken glass shards and fine bullet holes on the front cover of the car. Bang! The moment the glass fragments hit the ground, the car riddled with bullets exploded. The dilapidated car wreckage was accompanied by gunpowder smoke and dirty dust that filled the air. Mixed with the strong smell of blood, thick fog like a sandstorm swept across the streets in an instant. On the other side of the dusty sky, a group of soldiers wearing Special Forces equipment were chasing after them at high speed, but stopped in front of the thick fog. The leading captain wore a mask, picked up the communicator on his waist and said to the other side. Mist appeared in Area B1, and we lost the Fire Lord. After a while, I heard a cold female voice coming from the other side of the communicator. I understand. Hold the B1 area and don't let the target escape. I will send ability users to join you and do my best to surround and suppress the Balrog Lord. Yes. After the leader answered, he immediately put down the communicator in his hand, waved to the teammates behind him, and the team immediately moved forward and took action. On the other side of the thick blood mist, zombies with red bodies were flashing in the city, making ear-piercing roars from time to time. After hearing this, other zombies nearby also trembled instinctively and roared. Ouch! The city at night becomes even more eerie. The red figure kept running wildly, and at the next moment it swooped down towards the tall building. The strong impact did not stop after breaking the glass, and actually penetrated the entire building. White smoke billowed behind him, the building fell down instantly, and the red-clothed zombie crashed into a deep alley below without looking back. Hiss! When the body hit the wall, sparks suddenly appeared. The red zombie fell on the ground at the entrance of the alley, twitching all over. The blood-red eyes were full of violence and bloodlust, and a zombie staggered towards the alley. What's weird is that the zombies staggering from the alley didn't avoid the red monster like the ordinary zombies on the street before. Instead, they roared at the red zombies with ice-blue mist exuding from their mouths. But the red zombie's strong arms stretched out in an instant, and grabbed the zombie's face with open palms. What is amazing is that the thick arm instantly exploded into a ball of blood mist. The blood mist condensed and turned into a blood-colored vine. Blood bubbles kept appearing on the blood-colored vines, and the captured zombies gradually became thinner, as if all the blood in the body has been drained. Slowly, the eyes of the zombie in red became redder and redder, but the zombie in his hand became like a mummy and was casually discarded on the ground. It was already dead and could no longer die. The red zombie had just abandoned the ordinary zombies, and covered his head with a ferocious expression. His roaring voice gradually became deeper, and then his head tilted and he passed out in the deep alley. The amazing thing is that the body of the red zombie is slowly wasting away, and the red skin is gradually fading into the pale color of a patient. Immediately, something even more unbelievable happened. This terrifying monster with blood-red skin gradually transformed into a human form, and finally transformed into a handsome young man. On a street a few hundred meters away from the alley, a group of soldiers wearing blue uniforms of the Special Forces were searching in an orderly manner. From time to time, monster-like roars can be heard in the quiet streets. In a dark, deep alley, a young man in ragged clothes and almost naked torso is lying on the wall, not knowing whether to live or die. But if you look carefully, you can see the young man. Chest rises and falls slightly. As if awakened by the unquiet night around him, the young man's eyelashes trembled and he slowly opened his eyes. Touching her dazed head, Mu Chu, who had just woke up, felt as if her whole body was about to fall apart. If I had known about the graduation party, I wouldn't have drank so much. Why does my whole body hurt? Why? After rubbing her sore eyes, Mu Chu realized something was wrong. She was not in a soft and comfortable bed at home, but instead lying in a deep alley somewhere. His body subconsciously stepped back, but his hand felt that it had touched something unconsciously. When he suddenly turned around, he discovered that what was next to him was not a stone, but a shriveled and hideous mummy. Mu Chu was about to scream subconsciously, but chaotic memories flooded into her brain like a tide through the neural network. It was a scene like the Shira hell, a red figure, as if covered with a blood-stained garment, with corpses like a hill beneath him. Each corpse was shrunken and looked horrified, as if it had experienced some horrific experience before death. At this moment, the blood-clothed figure looks like a monster destroying the world. Roar! The blood-clothed figure was surrounded by zombies. They were all roaring at the blood-clothed figure without fear of death. Not only that, but standing in front of the bloody figure was a huge one-horned monster of unknown species. Lava was boiling all over its body, and it rushed towards the blood-clothed monster with its bloody mouth open. Scenes of memories played back in Mu Chu's brain like a film. In these moments, Mu Chu felt dizzy and her brain was about to burst. After reading these memories, a thin layer of cold sweat broke out on Mu Chu's forehead. He could clearly see that the blood-red figure in the memory was his own face. And this world is no longer like the real world we live in. The zombie virus broke out here 2 years ago. Cities were occupied by the majestic zombie army. Countless people were displaced and their families were destroyed. The self in his memory also did not survive the disaster. To his surprise, he turned into a mutated zombie. Evolved a powerful ability, Devour. My own firepower was obtained after devouring the one-horned monster in my memory. And I also became stronger step by step after devouring this powerful power, and finally became the zombie emperor in this city. And he discovered that the zombie he just swallowed was actually a mutated zombie, and the ability it evolved turned out to be an ice power. Have I traveled to a parallel world, or? Mu Chu's face instantly became frightened, her brows furrowed and she stopped talking. Another guess that Mu Chu did not dare to say again was that the 10 years in real life were all a dream. The real self turned into a zombie that lusted after human flesh as early as 2 years ago. But he can no longer think about it so much, because he remembers that as early as 2 months ago, he was captured by the neighboring survivor base in his own territory. And during these 2 months, he suffered inhuman abuse and research. However, he relied on his powerful self-healing ability to break free after recovering 3 days ago, causing a scene in the base and then escaping back to his territory. It was on the way to escape that he regained consciousness after falling into coma. There are still soldiers chasing him. No matter what, my current situation is very dangerous. Mu Chu forced herself to calm down. Waves of cold wind howled, but Mu Chu, whose body had evolved into a zombie king, felt a slight chill in her heart. There was no time to sort out her thoughts, and she couldn't care about the shriveled corpse beside her. Mu Chu hurriedly changed into the blood-stained clothes on the corpse. With a thought in his mind, a ball of flame appeared in his palm, and the shabby clothes and shriveled corpse that he had replaced were burned to ashes by the flames he released. Just as he stood up unsteadily, there was a sound of footsteps behind him. Mu Chu smiled bitterly but did not run away. If the probability of someone with abilities appearing among humans is 1 in 1,000, then the probability of mutant zombies among zombies is 1 in 10,000. Different from ordinary mutant zombies whose bodies have mutated, real mutant zombies have a variety of abilities, each of which is weird and powerful and difficult to guard against. Already surrounded by heavy siege, it is obviously impossible to escape from the current situation. The thoughtful Mu Chu immediately made a decision to blend into human society. A zombie is trying to blend into the human world. This decision sounds a bit appalling, but even though Mewtwo has received all the memories and combat experience of the Zombie King, it does not mean that he can accept the fact that he has turned into a flesh-eating zombie in an instant. Subconsciously, he still preferred to stay in human society. He swore that he was definitely not trying to survive among humans because he was greedy for life and afraid of death. But, can I really muddle through? Click. Who? Feeling the voice behind her, Mewtwo subconsciously raised her hands and turned around to face the soldiers in front of her, with a look of surprise and fear on her face. PFF'd. I saw a girl's melodious laughter coming from the ranks of soldiers in front. Mewtwo took a closer look and saw a pretty girl in blue among the crowd. Unlike the other soldiers, this girl was not wearing the combat uniform of a Special Forces soldier, nor did she look like a girl. Take any protective measures. There are still a few people in this team dressed like this. This girl should be an ability user. Mewtwo secretly thought. As the name suggests, ability users are humans who have endured the virus and mutated and evolved. They are now the fighters who stand at the forefront of mankind. Uncle, this guy is so funny. The girl covered her mouth and smiled at the leader. Indeed, now Mewtwo has changed into the clothes of the mummy, but the originally white clothes are already stained with blood, and his handsome face is also stained with dirt and blood, coupled with his fearful expression and the movement of raising his hands, looking extremely embarrassed and weird. The awkward situation was instantly broken by the girl's words. The captain looked helplessly at the girl in blue and said helplessly, "You girl." Her family knows her own affairs, and this girl has had an eccentric personality since she was a child. Now that the end of the world has come, this child has awakened her powers, and no one can control her. There was a red monster passing by here just now, and it burned a zombie to ashes. Mewtwo said tremblingly, but her eyes kept staring at the guns emitting blue light in the hands of the soldiers. In my memory, these firearms have long been improved versions, and they are extremely lethal to zombies. In order to deal with yourself, did you even take out such a small number of weapons? I figured out a lot of things in an instant. My body was trembling, and then layers of frost appeared on the ground. My home is nearby. I went out to look for food because I was too hungry. I didn't do anything. Seeing the layers of frost condensing on the ground, the girl in blue who spoke just now exclaimed. This kind of ability, could it be that this is a rare elemental ability user? What? There can be people with abilities in dangerous areas like the red zone. Or are they elemental ones? This is a real treasure. Everyone looked at each other, talking, and looked at Mewtwo with surprise. The captain did not speak, but looked at the alley in front of him, and then raised the communicator in his hand. Report the S-Class Heretic, Lord Fire Demon. We have fled to Area A3. In addition, we found a survivor in an alley, suspected to have elemental powers. I only heard a cold female voice coming from the communicator. Take the survivors back to the base and order Group C in Area A3 to prepare to meet the enemy. The other teams will continue to hunt and gather for an ambush to capture the target at any time. The captain who received the instruction immediately waved his hand, and then said to the girl in blue, "Linger, take the survivors back to the base for an awakening test. The people in Group A will follow me and continue the search." Yes. Why do you need me to do this kind of thing again? Hearing the girl's complaint, it was obvious that this was not the first time that she had picked up a survivor. Mewtwo blinked her innocent eyes and said nothing. Watching the team leave, only Mewtwo and the girl in blue were left in the small alley. The girl in blue looked at Mewtwo reaching out her hand, showed a sweet smile and said, "Introduce yourself, I am Wei Linger, a member of the Yuhai Base Special Forces." Mewtwo hesitated for a moment, but still held the blood-stained hand, deliberately making herself a little nervous and said, "Mewtwo, my name is Mewtwo." Mewtwo, right, I'll take you back to the base now. We're on the edge of the red zone and we shouldn't encounter powerful monsters. Don't worry, I can punch those ordinary zombies in the green zone one by one. As she said that, the girl raised her arms. Her slender white arms seemed to have no strength at all. The sun gradually dropped below the horizon, but the shadows of the two people in the dusk were reflected very long. You mean, this man named Mewtwo was picked up by you in an alley in the red zone? In a high-rise office in the safety zone called Yuhai Base, a woman in military uniform with a frosty complexion was sitting on a chair and reading a document report. There was a man standing in front of the table. If Mu Chu were here, he would definitely recognize that this man was the Special Forces captain in the alley. The woman in military uniform has a strong nose and beautiful face, and her pair of willow leaf eyebrows make her even more heroic. The captain replied, "Yes, sir. According to this person, his family ran a supermarket before the apocalypse, and after the apocalypse, he lived on the food stored in the supermarket. In recent days, the food has been used up, so he decided to take risks and go out in search of food." After hearing this, the woman in military uniform first lowered her head and thought for a moment, then smiled, put the document on the table and said, "Wei Ying, how credible do you think his statement is?" The captain named Wei Ying said, We have checked the supermarket he described. The entire building has been smashed to pieces by the Balrog. There is no evidence to confirm his identity." Wei Ying said, suddenly remembering the frost that formed on Mu Chu's feet out of fear in the alley, and said in surprise, "But according to what we know, this Mu Chu may be an ability user or even a rare elemental system." Quote, "Oh, is that so?" Hearing this, the woman in military uniform frowned, knocked on the table, pondered for a moment and said, "No matter what, elemental ability users are exactly the talents we are scarce now. Take him to do the awakened person test. If he passes, he will be trained in the training department and someone will continue to keep an eye on him. If there are any special circumstances, he will inform me immediately." Quote, Wei Ying gave a standard military salute. Yes. When Mu Chu woke up, it was already dawn. He opened the quilt and got up from the bed. The bright sunshine shone warmly from outside through the window, making him mistakenly think that he was still in the prosperous but busy world before the end of the world. At this moment, Mu Chu had already changed into a relatively clean white shirt. Unknowingly, he had been living in this Yuhai base for 3 days. He took a deep breath. Except for the occasional smell of blood, the air seemed to be no different from the real world. On the contrary, the large-scale shutdown of factory machines caused the nature to mother feels much more comfortable. Very funny thing. The place where he is now is a safe zone called Jade Sea Base. It is composed of survivor alliances from several nearby municipalities. It has tens of thousands of people. It can be regarded as one of the few shelters since the end of the world. He turned around and looked at the people on the bed around him. Except for a few people who were fast asleep, all the people who were awake had haggard faces and empty eyes as if they had lost their yearning for life. Like myself, these are all survivors who have been rescued from the disaster area, and most of them possess superpowers or have a tendency to evolve. Only then could they be arranged in this room that could protect them from wind and rain. The treatment in such a temporary residence is already very good. At least they can guarantee hot and cold meals. As for the fate of other ordinary people, it's hard to say. Those who were lucky enough to have a skill could still make a living in this age of cannibalism. Those who were unlucky enough to live on the street and eat meat were commonplace. After taking a deep breath and sorting herself out, Mu Chu walked out of the room and came outside. The moment she opened the door, the glaring sunlight shone in, which stung Mu Chu and subconsciously raised her arms to block it. Sitting casually on a step by the side of the road, Mu Chu couldn't help but fall into deep thought as she looked at the flow of people in front of her who were not densely packed with shabby clothes and dusty faces. First of all, it was obvious that he had sneaked into this survivor base. The medical staff responsible for the inspection did not notice any abnormalities in his body when he entered earlier. Coupled with the fact that he deliberately exposed his supernatural powers, it should have attracted the attention of his superiors, right? In my impression, there are very few awakened ones of other elemental types. When I was still the monster codenamed Fire Demon Lord, I was very interested in this kind of zombies. Very interested in eating them. According to normal procedures, I should be placed into a combat team similar to the one before. Then I can develop steadily and plan for a retreat. Hey, it looks like you're recovering well. Not far away, a pretty and well-dressed girl walked over. She looked like an urban beauty before the apocalypse, and was incompatible with the slightly dilapidated scene around her. Wei Ling. Mu Chu raised her hand and greeted the girl. This person is none other than Wei Ling, who took Mu Chu all the way back to the Yuhai base. In the 3 days since he came to the base, apart from some staff responsible for reception and review, the girl in front of him had the most exchanges with him. At this moment, Wei-ling was holding a bag of bread in her hand. She walked closer and handed the bread to Mu-Chu naturally. Mu-Chu was stunned for a moment, then reacted and took the bread and said directly, "Why are you so nice to me?" It's no wonder that Mu-Chu was surprised. Although food like bread is not very precious to an awakened person like Wei-ling, Mu-Chu had just met her, and Wei-ling couldn't make the mistake of staying away from home for him. "Come here. The other survivors in the house are still struggling to survive on 3 meals a day." Unexpectedly, after hearing Mu-Chu's words, Wei-ling just slapped Mu-Chu on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Don't be so sentimental. I came to help you partly because your experience is somewhat similar to mine. I can't help but sympathize, but on the other hand." Mu-Chu's eyes couldn't help but be attracted by the girl's words. An awakened person who may be of the elemental system has great potential for development. In other words, you are worthy of me personally coming to win over you. After saying that, Wei-ling patted Mu-Chu's shoulder, as if she was very optimistic about you. "So, young man, you have to work hard." Mu-Chu had already calculated something in her mind, but she was a little surprised by the girl's straightforward answer. She shook her head with a wry smile. "Sure enough, there really is no such thing as a free lunch." Wei-ling actually nodded in agreement. "Not bad, good, rare things can be lived in, rare things can be lived in." Stretching out, the girl's slim curves were revealed. Wei-ling yawned slightly, rubbed her eyes and said, "It seems that you have almost recovered and it's time to adapt to the environment here. Someone will come over in the afternoon to take you for a test." After saying that, he patted Mu-Chu's shoulder again and said with a serious smile, "If you are really a rare elemental awakener, the higher-ups will definitely train you." The awakened ones, test. As Mu-Chu said this, she unconsciously opened the bag of bread, grabbed the bread and took a bite. The bean paste filling tastes pretty good. During the conversation with Wei-ling, Mu-Chu learned the specific information about the so-called awakened ones. Awakened ones refer to special humans whose bodies have been corroded by the virus, and instead of mutating into zombie monsters, they have awakened some kind of strange power. Among them, those who can prevent their brains from being invaded by viruses and lose their rationality are the noble, awakened ones, after the end of the world. On the contrary, those who lose their rationality and only have eating and destructive instincts in their bodies are called heretics. There are all kinds of superpowers, and they are all kinds of strange, but generally speaking, they are divided into 3 categories: superpower system, mutation system and element system. As the name suggests, the elemental system means that the body can control the awakened elements at will. Just like Mu-Chu's previous incarnation as the Fire Demon Lord, he can independently control fire. The flames emitted can burn down an entire building in an instant. The Fire Lord was even rated as a dangerous S-class heretic by Yuhai base. Another example is the ice zombie heretic that he later devoured. Although his level was not high, he was still a rare and powerful person among the zombies. According to the level classification, he was at least B level. The abilities of the elemental system are extremely rare among the entire group of awakened ones. It is not an exaggeration to say that they are only 1 in a million, because their destructive power is astonishing and far beyond the comparison of the other 2 systems. Once the ability is raised to its peak, the ability of the awakened one is enough to overwhelm mountains and seas, and destroy heaven and earth. The awakened ones of the mutant type tend to have physical mutations. Some of them are as rough as bears and become extremely powerful. They can blast through a building with 1 punch. Some of them grow the claws of a running wolf. Even the speed can be comparable to that of a running wolf on the grassland, but this type of awakened person usually has a strange appearance and a different physique than ordinary people. The last kind of super energy system, awakened people are the most special. They often do not have the super destructive power of the element system, nor do they have the powerful physique of the mutation type awakened people, but the biggest feature of this kind of awakened people is their ability. Strange abilities such as teleportation, invisibility, telekinesis, etc. are all classified as superpowers. Elemental elements are rare among the 3 categories of awakened ones. Now you know why the organization attaches so much importance to you. Wei-ling raised her eyebrows. Mu-Chu spread his hands and stared at his palm. Strictly speaking, he should belong to the awakened person of the superpower system, but his swallowing ability was too overbearing. Even among the mysterious awakened people of the superpower system, he was the best. As if she noticed something strange about Mewtwo, Weilinger turned around and asked, "Hey, what's wrong with you? You look absent-minded." Being stared at by Weilinger's crystal blue eyes, Mewtwo felt a little guilty and asked hurriedly, "What about you? What kind of awakened person are you?" Before, Weilinger escorted Mewtwo back to the Yuhai safe zone. Fortunately, she didn't encounter any large monsters along the way. Even if there were some zombies blocking the road, they would all be knocked away by Weilinger's car. Mewtwo had no chance to experience Weilinger's superpowers. Weilinger stood up, put an index finger against her red lips, blinked her watery eyes and said, "Keep it a secret. You'll know if you do the awakening test this afternoon." Weilinger gave Mewtwo a pass, and then left with brisk steps. Seeing this, Mewtwo shook her head, threw the bread packaging aside, and turned back to the small house where she lived. As soon as I entered the door, there happened to be soldiers inside distributing food. These foods are usually distributed to the survivors and refugees who have just entered the base like Shangmukcho. Of course, there are also some moldy and rotten biscuits, bread, etc., mostly. Sometimes I can't even do the most basic things. He sighed softly. Although he had the red bean bread sent by Weilinger to cushion his belly, it was obviously not enough to stuff his teeth. So he went to get the food. As expected, Mewtwo received a bag that was already seriously moldy. Mewtwo tried to bite the biscuit, and the feeling in the mouth was comparable to chewing raw steel bars. After the soldiers who handed out food left, Mewtwo sighed and put a bag of small steel bars next to her pillow, intending to use it as emergency food when she was extremely hungry. "Hey, new guy." At this time, a fat man walked over from the side. The fat was almost piled up into a meatball. Mewtwo really wondered how this fat man could eat in this apocalyptic world where he had so many meals. "It looks like this. I saw with my own eyes that you came back after eating bread outside. After eating, you dared to share the limited food with everyone." The fat man was seen looking fiercely at Mewtwo, but his eyes never left the little steel bar Mewtwo placed on the bed. Mewtwo smiled and said, "There is no rule in the base that you can't receive food after you have eaten something. Besides, whether I receive food or not, it doesn't seem to be up to you, right?" The other survivors in the room didn't speak, but they all stared at Mewtwo's bag of small steel bars with salivating eyes, as if they were seeing some rare treasure right in front of them. The fat man swallowed his saliva, looked at Mewtwo and said, "Now is such a critical moment, every bite of food means one less bite. Don't be so selfish, give me the food, and I will share it with everyone." After saying that, a pair of big hands grabbed the small steel bar that Mewtwo placed on the bed. A cold light flashed across Mewtwo's eyes, and there seemed to be a hint of red deep in her pupils. Crack! The fat man's rough arm was still in midair when it was suddenly grabbed by a fair and slender hand. The fat man took a closer look and saw that it was Mewtwo who grabbed his arm and stopped him. It was obvious that the fat man wanted to say something else. Mewtwo lowered his head and couldn't see clearly the expression on his face, which made him a little unhappy. "You, get out of here. Now is the time for delicious food." The fat man didn't intend to be polite anymore, so he picked up a thick slap and was about to hit Mewtwo. But in an instant, the fat man suddenly felt that the air around him was getting colder, and then there was a tingling sensation in his right arm. In the blink of an eye, his right arm actually lost consciousness. The fat man hurriedly lowered his head and discovered a scene that stunned him. Mewtwo's eyes were lowered, and there was no expression on his cold face. Roads of frost actually condensed on his white palms, and then the coldness quickly spread to the fat man's arms until his entire arm was frozen. The fat man then he stumbled to the ground with a horrified expression, holding tightly his right arm that had been completely frozen, and wailed. "Awakened one, he is the awakened one." Some survivors in the room saw the method used by Mewtwo and immediately shouted in horror. Mewtwo lowered her head slightly and raised her head, scanning the surrounding survivors with an indifferent expression. She saw that these people's eyes were full of fear, anxiety, envy, respect and other emotions. The only thing that disappeared was the greed in his eyes when he saw the food. This is the benefit of power. The word, possession, has always been a privilege only for the strong. After learning the identity of Mewtwo's awakener, the eyes of the survivors in the entire room became strange. Envy, jealousy, adoration, fear and other emotions filled this small room of less than 50 square meters. The fat man was quickly taken away by the patrolling soldiers, with ice still frozen on his arms. Amidst the fat man's wails and the awe in Mewtwo's eyes, the room fell into an eerie silence. Until later, no one in this group saw the fat man again. Mewtwo shook her head. The fat man was driven to the bone by the cold air he had driven. If there were no special means or the ability of the awakened person to help him drive away the cold, the fat man would be completely disabled. He could have his arms broken, or his whole body could be paralyzed. He would be paralyzed for the rest of his life. Gotta spend it in bed. In the past few days, he had been digesting the messy memories of his original body, the Fire Demon Lord. Most of the Fire Demon Lord's memories were spent in endless killings, which made Mewtwo unavoidably tainted with some viciousness. Just for a moment, Mewtwo even wanted to use the flames to burn the fat man to death. In the end, reason prevailed, which allowed Mewtwo to stop in time and openly kill people in such a survivor base. Even if Mewtwo is a noble, awakened one, he cannot escape the blame. Mewtwo glanced at the many survivors in the room, but no one dared to look at her. Mewtwo nodded happily, lying on the bed and began to chew on the small steel bars with relish. The strong can do whatever they want without regard to the feelings of others. This is the most naked reality in the apocalypse. Ding! Congratulations to the host for meeting the check-in conditions and binding the Great World Check-in system. The cold voice echoed in Mewtwo's ears. Mewtwo was so frightened that she sat up. She looked around for a while but found that there was no one around. Binding the system for the first time, I will give you a reward, the magic energy of the Holy Lord. Please pay attention to the host to receive it. Immediately, Mewtwo felt a red halo emerge from her mind and merge into her body, and her body was filled with an inexplicable sense of power for an instant. Mewtwo was so satisfied that she almost transformed into the Fire Demon Lord, but she held it back under the control of reason. The next check-in location is the Daishindi Entertainment Club, and the reward will be unlocked, Nia's mask which can summon the ghost army. Mewtwo stood up with a pop, frightening the surrounding survivors to tremble. System. Goldfinger. As a senior novel fan in his previous life, he was of course very familiar with systems and so on. He originally thought that he was gifted with the ability to devour, but he never expected that the system would help him. He tried to communicate with the so-called Great World Sign-in system, but did not get any response. The Holy Lord's demonic energy. Mewtwo, who failed to get a response from the system, was not annoyed, but instead murmured to herself. Mewtwo was stunned at first, but then she almost jumped with excitement. Who is the Holy Lord? It can be said that it is the boss that runs through the entire drama of The Adventures of Jackie Chan. Whether it is the 12 zodiac signs or the 8 demons, they are all related to it. Think about the 12 weird and unpredictable abilities: the snake's invisibility, chickens float, monkeys transform, horses can cure all diseases, dogs can live forever. Just thinking about the usefulness of these abilities makes people salivate. If he has obtained the demonic energy of the Holy Lord, doesn't this mean that he has obtained these 12 talismans? Suppressing the excitement in her heart, Mewtwo left the room where the survivors lived and went to an open space in the woods on the hillside behind. Because in these last days, the more remote the place is, the higher the risk factor, so not many people dare to come to such a place. There was no one around, but Mewtwo closed her eyes slightly, and she could even hear the sound of the breeze blowing in her ears. The next moment, Mewtwo opened her eyes suddenly and saw 2 scorching lasers shooting out of her eyes. Between the lightning and flint, the fiery red laser had penetrated the big tree in front of Mewtwo. It's really fun. Mewtwo clearly remembered that the original Fire Demon Lord did not have the skill of laser eyes. Then he tried the chicken's floating, the rabbit's speed, the chicken and the rabbit's flight, the dragon's explosion, the sheep's soul leaving the body, the monkey's transformation. All these magical abilities that he had dreamed of in his previous life were all realized by him one by one. To be honest, the dragon talisman and the ox talisman are the most useless to me. Mewtwo stood in the sky and couldn't help but comment on the 12 abilities she had just obtained. His Balrog avatar originally had the ability to control fire and was born with divine power, but these two abilities were the most useless for him. However, the horse charm can cure all diseases, and the dog's immortality is difficult for him to try for a while. After all, he couldn't really just kill him to see if he would die. Mewtwo looked around and saw that there was no one around. A red light flashed in her eyes, and her body expanded rapidly. Roar! A huge red monster suddenly appeared in this dense mountain forest. The monster was several feet tall, with sharp fangs and claws, red eyes, and muscles all over its body. A dragon trailed behind it and swayed along with its huge body. Two devil horns stood upright on its head, showing its majestic aura. Is this the Holy Lord? Mewtwo looked at the body that was several times larger than the original Fire Demon Lord, checked the body's abnormality, spread out his palms and murmured. This is a rhythm that defies heaven. This body that is fused with the Holy Lord's demonic energy has completely inherited the Holy Lord's abilities. Except for the devil horns on the head and the red body, it is almost 70–80% similar to the original Holy Lord. Looking at the quiet and peaceful city of survivors in front of him, the red eyes of the Fire Demon Lord, transformed by Mewtwo, narrowed slightly, and the turbulent murderous intention flashed in his eyes. Not good. Mewtwo hurriedly patted her face and thought to herself, Tiger Talisman. In an instant, a kind of calm and clear thought came to his heart, and Mewtwo's body shape changed from the original Fire Demon Lord back to the form of an ordinary person. Fortunately, at that moment, I couldn't control my thoughts and wanted to rush to the city below to kill everyone. The sudden surge in power not only made Mewtwo excited like never before, but also inspired the vicious side of the Fire Demon Lord in Mewtwo's heart. So Mewtwo quickly used the Tiger Talisman's ability to reconcile yin and yang to seal the violent emotions deep in her heart, replacing them with the current, peaceful state. He is not stupid enough to completely seal away the evil side in this apocalyptic era of cannibalism, and only retain the good side of the virgin to seek death. Compared to my previous state, my current peaceful mood allows me to disguise myself better. Don't be surprised by changes. This is the state Mewtwo needs more now. He traveled to this man-eating apocalypse as an ordinary person in his previous life, and suddenly devoured the memory of the Fire Demon Lord's abilities. He had just obtained the sign-in system and absorbed the Holy Lord's demonic energy. He experienced things that ordinary people would never experience in their lives in just 3 days. It was good that he didn't go crazy with excitement. Now he has a state of heart calm, which has really helped him stabilize his emotions a lot. The Great World Sign-in System. Thinking of the voice that just appeared in her mind, Mewtwo murmured to herself. Unfortunately, there is still no response. It seems that this Roush subsystem will only appear when it reaches its designated check-in location. He did not forget his last words before the system disappeared. Nigga's mask. Xiaoxi couldn't help but feel a movement in her heart because of Mewtwo's current calm state of mind. It seems that the system wants me to inherit all the Holy Lord's inheritance. Nia Mask is one of the 9 masks of the Sealer Ghost General in The Adventures of Jackie Chan. It has the ability to summon the Shadow Core. If you get this mask, doesn't it mean you have an entire ninja army that works hard, doesn't eat or drink, and never betrays? Mewtwo admitted that he was moved. But now, Mewtwo's deep eyes turned back, as if she felt something. Her body suddenly floated, and then flew directly towards the survivor camp ahead. Not long after Mewtwo left, a rustling sound suddenly came from the woods behind. A team of well-equipped soldiers armed with heavy guns suddenly appeared on the hillside where Mewtwo was just now. The leader of the team was the same guardian eagle who found Mewtwo after tracking the Fire Demon Lord that day. Wei Ying looked at the jungle in front of him that had been destroyed into ruins, with a solemn expression in his eyes. You can't be wrong. The energy fluctuations just detected came from the S-class heretic who escaped from the laboratory a few days ago, the Fire Demon Lord. Next to Wei Ying, a white-haired man wearing black-rimmed glasses and a suit walked to the front of the site that was destroyed by the Fire Demon Lord, to explore. He walked to Wei Ying calmly, with no expression on his face, and said, "It's basically certain that the source of that weird energy comes from here." Wei Ying sighed and said, "He has become stronger again." The white-haired man looked outside the mountain. There was a city that had already become chaotic due to zombie riots. Before the end plan comes, he has no chance to evolve. After leaving the foot of the mountain, Mewtwo immediately activated the invisibility ability of the snake charm. All because he is now in an awkward position. The body of the Fire Demon Lord was so huge that almost the moment he transformed, his clothes were torn to pieces, leaving only a few pitiful pieces of fabric covering his lower body. In other words, he is almost in a state of streaking now. The noise that just happened on the mountain was too big. Has it attracted the attention of the base? Mewtwo's current understanding of this world is not deep enough, and there is no need for him to be hostile to these human survivors. Fire Demon Lord is only the boss in the red zone, but as far as he knows, in the black zone, above the red zone in Yuhai City, there are several auras that make him, an S-level heretic, feel palpitations. The Fire Lord who evolved after devouring the Holy Lord's demonic energy should be enough to compete with those powerful monsters in the black area. As he spoke, the wind blew under Mewtwo's feet, and she quickly rushed to an abandoned shopping mall at the foot of the mountain. The thick cold-proof clothing in these abandoned shopping malls had long been looted. Mewtwo did a simple search and found a complete set of shirts to wear. After thinking about it, I found a black windbreaker and put it on outside. Mewtwo took a look in the mirror, and saw that his handsome face looked much better than the sloppy look he had before. Now he looks a bit like a villain boss. Mewtwo rubbed her chin, quite satisfied with her image. Return to your physical form and return to the nearby room of survivors. Survivors excavated in the ruins, like Mewtwo, will be sent to safe areas for resettlement after undergoing strict infection tests. Survivors like them were all assigned to this group of houses at the foot of the mountain, separated only by a mountain from the chaotic ruins of the city. Once a zombie riot occurs, the first to be affected are these survivor rooms located on the edge of the base. As a result, countless people flocked to it, scrambling to plunder resources, just to get the qualification to settle in a location close to the center of the base's safety zone. There was a comfortable environment and tight guards, and it was much safer than the housing areas on the edge. After returning to the room, Mewtwo lay directly back on the bed and closed her eyes. It looks like he is pretending to be asleep, but in fact he has secretly activated the power of the sheep talisman. Out-of-body experience. Mewtwo only felt that her whole body began to feel light, and soon she was floating in the air from the bed. When I opened my eyes, I realized that my body was still lying on the bed, and my spirit body was already floating in the sky. The survivors around me were even more unaware that I was a spirit body. Feeling that there was a mysterious connection between her soul and body, Mewtwo tried to put her soul into her body. When he opened his eyes again, his soul returned to his body, and Mewtwo regained control over his body. Mewtwo felt relieved and used the ability to leave the body again. This time, the spirit body was floating in the air. No longer hesitating, Mewtwo drove the spirit body through the wall this time and flew outside. Relying on the silent and invisible spirit state to overlook the base, Mewtwo had a panoramic view of the true situation of the entire Jade Sea safe zone. The edge of Yuhai base is deserted, with only a few scattered groups of soldiers patrolling with guns. Going a little deeper, you can see some restored streets and alleys, and you can see some ragged homeless people here and there. There were very few women and children around, and they could travel freely on the streets. The neatly dressed pedestrians all looked faintly tired. Mewtwo could vaguely feel the energy fluctuations of the awakened ones. Mewtwo discovered that the deeper into the center of the base, the more awakened people she sensed, and most of them were in groups with huge energy. Mewtwo was thoughtful, her spirit body hovering in the air. He discovered that his out-of-body ability was not as unlimited as in the original work. At most a few hundred miles away to half the Yuhai base, he felt that the connection between his soul and body was getting weaker and weaker. Realizing this, he did not dare to drive his spirit body to explore deeper, but only snooped near the center of the base. Suddenly, Mewtwo sensed a strange energy fluctuation. Mewtwo's heart moved, and the spirit body came to a tower near the southeast side of the center of the safe zone. In the tower, a group of mysterious people wearing purple robes were gathering together. On the carpet surrounded by the crowd, a six-pointed star pattern dyed with blood suddenly appeared. This group of weirdos gathered together as if they were performing some weird ritual. The leading purple-robed man lowered his head slightly and muttered words. Some obscure words came out of his mouth. The purple-robed men around him were all silent and said nothing. Mu Chu felt a little strange, and immediately drove the spirit body forward, intending to find out what the purple-robed man was talking about. But at this moment, the head of the leader of the purple-robed man suddenly lifted up, and suddenly, an old face with a withered face and wrinkles that was about to die appeared in front of Mu Chu. Who? The old man suddenly looked in Mu Chu's direction. Immediately, a gleam of light seemed to flash in the old man's eyes, and a burst of invisible mental fluctuations struck towards Mu Chu's spirit body like thunder. Mu Chu's heart skipped a beat, and she felt inexplicably that this attack could hurt her soul, so she quickly urged her spirit body to escape through the wall. There was just a boom sound, and a huge hole was created in the thick and solid wall of the tower by this spirit. Mu Chu hurriedly returned to her body, her face still filled with lingering fear the moment her soul returned to her body. At this time, the tiger talisman took effect, balancing Mu Chu's panicked state of mind again. What really surprised me was that the old man in purple robe could detect the existence of the spirit body. It's unclear whether that spiritual attack can cause harm to me. It seems we still can't underestimate the awakened ones in the base. Mu Chu calmed down and analyzed carefully for a moment. As for what rituals those mysterious purple-robed men were performing, it had nothing to do with the current Mu Chu. As long as those purple-robed people don't come to trouble him, Mu Chu won't feel uncomfortable doing nothing. So Mu Chu closed his eyes with peace of mind. This time he really planned to take a rest. At noon, another soldier came to deliver food. The food was the same as in the past, it was still some rotten and moldy biscuits and bread. Strangely, what a soldier handed to Mu Chu was not a moldy biscuit, but an unopened bag of purple rice bread and a piece of ham. Different from the situation in the morning, this time no survivors came to snatch the food, even if the food in Mu Chu's hands was much better than the others. Soon, Mu Chu finished eating the bread and ham amid the swallowing sounds of the survivors around him. In this way, until the afternoon, a group of soldiers came to the room where the survivors lived and took Mu Chu away. Survivors were also brought out one after another from several surrounding rooms. Soon, under the leadership of the group of soldiers, Mu Chu and his party arrived at a training camp near the edge of the safety zone. What is called a training camp is actually just a large stadium before the end of the world. After a simple transformation, it became the training ground of the Yuhai base. As soon as he entered, Mu Chu saw that the entire venue was divided into several areas. And at the top of these areas, there is a platform. At this moment, there was a row of survivors like them standing below the platform. Mu Chu counted them, and there were dozens of survivors in their group. Some survivors have strange appearances and different body shapes from ordinary people. Some survivors were tall, with bare faces, and even their palms were thick and dark, like bear paws. Some survivors have green faces and fangs that look like evil spirits, and they always have an evil smile on their lips, which can make people feel heartbroken just by looking at them. Mu Chu and his party were taken to the platform by the soldiers and stood together with the dozens of survivors. There were more than a dozen men and women standing on the stage. Although they were not wearing uniforms, they were all neatly and brightly dressed, which was in sharp contrast to the shabby survivors in the audience. There are not many survivors coming this time. After all, it has been 2 years since the apocalypse broke out. It is becoming increasingly difficult to find survivors in the ruins. The probability of there being an awakened person inside is also very slim. I hope there are some good people inside. The search team's job is not going to be easy. These people were whispering on the stage, but Mu Chu's hearing was so sharp that she directly captured the key information of what they said. Mu Chu glanced towards the stage, and soon he spotted the pretty and graceful Wei Ling in the crowd. Wei Ling was also very happy after seeing Mu Chu. She stood on tiptoes and waved to Mu Chu, who also smiled back. However, during the moment of interacting with Wei Ling, Mu Chu suddenly noticed a vicious gaze staring at her. Mu Chu turned around and saw a strange man in the crowd. He had sparse eyebrows and a vulgar appearance. He was squinting his eyes and glancing towards her intentionally or unintentionally. Although the expression was very subtle, Mu Chu was still keenly aware of the hostility in this man's eyes. I have never met him, why would he have such inexplicable hostility towards me? Mu Chu thought to herself. At this moment, a burly man wearing a jet black leather vest on the platform glanced at the crowd and said, "Since you can stand here, Shang must have been discovered to have supernatural powers and become one of the lucky few in this apocalyptic world, the awakened one." The eyes of many survivors in the audience were immediately attracted, and they all looked at the man in the vest with burning eyes. In this end of the world, having superpowers and becoming an awakened person means that you have the ticket to become a superior person. Money, women, status, fame and fortune, as long as you want it, these are all within your reach. But, suddenly, the man in the vest's voice stopped and his eyes became fierce. Hearing him roar, veins popped up in his already burly body, and his already knotted muscles swelled even more. Thick hair began to grow on his face, and crisscrossing black lines spread across his body. There were several black lines on his forehead. The word, King, is vaguely painted on it, and even the hands have a pair of tiger claws, which are powerful and intimidating. In an instant, a tiger roar resounded throughout the training ground, shocking everyone in the audience and leaving them in a daze. Tiger roaring in the forest. The many survivors in the audience were all shocked by the tiger roaring in the forest style of the man in the vest. As if they had seen some ferocious beast, they looked frightened and stood uneasily. Some people even fell to the ground, crying. Mu Chu stood where he was. Of course he would not be frightened by this hand. The roar of the man in the waistcoat was actually a kind of spiritual attack, which directly hit the human heart and caused such a terrifying effect. Even ordinary people who are more determined will not be affected too much. Mu Chu looked around and saw that there were still a few people who were determined and unaffected. After secretly writing down these people, Mu Chu looked at the man in a vest who was roaring on the stage again. At this moment, the man in the vest is completely different from ordinary people. His whole body is covered with brown hair, like a standing tiger. The man in the vest looked at the frightened survivors below and frowned. However, while enjoying superior rights, you must also endure more severe challenges than ordinary people. At this time, a middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes next to the man in the waistcoat echoed. "The discovered awakened ones will join our search team. The mission of the search team is to advance into dangerous ruins, explore intelligence, search for resources, survivors, eliminate heretics, etc." The man in the vest glanced at everyone. "And you are about to become a member of the search team. We are your instructors and will also become your future commanders and comrades in arms." After a passionate speech, Mu Chu and others were ordered to demonstrate their awakening powers one by one. Mu Chu originally thought that there would be some professional equipment for testing, but it turned out that he was overthinking it. It has only been 2 years since the apocalypse broke out, and no matter how advanced the technology is, it is still far from being able to easily detect a person's abilities. It's just that dozens of people showed their abilities to the search team on the stage one by one. I saw the man in the vest looking at the man in the suit next to him. The man in the suit waved his hand, and the pile of soil in front of him automatically gathered into a 2-meter-tall native. "Now start showing off your powers." The first person to activate his ability was able to assimilate with the surrounding rocks, and his body became as hard as steel and indestructible. I saw the stone man swooping forward suddenly, hitting the native man blankly, and directly smashed the native man into pieces. Yes, this ability is very suitable for serving as a human shield. "We want Lao Yan." The middle-aged man in a suit next to the man in the vest saw this ability to assimilate rocks, his eyes lit up, and he asked the man in the vest directly for help. The woman in red on the side said angrily, "What's wrong, Lao Ma? Is your team the only one missing someone? Our team is also missing a forward." The man in vest called, Lao Yan, repeatedly stopped him. "Okay. Xiao Zhang and Lao Ma's team died in a battle with a heretic not long ago during a search mission. Let Lao Ma be the new recruit this time." The woman in red said angrily, "Okay, then if there are any good seedlings, please keep them for us." In this way, a human flesh transaction was completed. The man in the suit waved his hand again, and the natives who had just been smashed to pieces by the stone man reunited. Next, immediately afterwards, Mu Chu saw a variety of awakening powers. Some people became as strong as an ox, lifting and throwing a 2-meter-tall native. Some people awakened to powerful gravity control and crushed the natives to pieces in the air. What's even more amazing is that the awakened person with the superpower system has awakened the skill of proficiency in swordsmanship. With a flying sword flying, the native has been cut into several sections. Doesn't this mean you have become the current swordsman? Mu Chu looked on in amazement. Of course, there are also some useless awakeners, such as someone who awakened the special ability of fried rice. What is more bizarre is that there is a man who can enlarge a certain part of his body several times, which makes many men envious. Mu Chu thought to herself, should we go back and find an opportunity to swallow up this kid's superpower? As the survivors of Mu Chu and his group have endless superpowers, the awakened members of the search team on the platform are also arguing endlessly. Steel people. Seeing the powerful abilities, the awakened ones on the stage inevitably started to fight for it, and some even promised huge profits to attract these newcomers who had just entered the base. Soon, the people in front showed off their awakened powers one by one, and it was Mu Chu's turn. Mu Chu took a step forward and looked at the natives who were slowly gathering, etc. At this moment, a high-pitched voice suddenly came from the platform. Mu Chu looked up and saw that the owner of the voice was the wretched man with sinister features and sly eyes that he had observed earlier. Let me test this person. Before anyone else could agree, the man jumped down and shouted sternly at Mu Chu, boy, you're the one who crippled my elder brother, right? Mu Chu was a little confused, but she heard the man with a wretched face continue. I have been looking for my eldest brother in these ruins for 2 whole years. I never expected that when I see him again, you will have already disabled him. I will settle this account with you today. The wretched man's eyes flickered, his cheekbones bulged, and a cold murderous look flashed in his eyes. Only then did Mu Chu remember that the eldest brother in this wretched man's mouth was actually the fat man who tried to snatch food that morning and was destroyed by him. So, you are here to seek revenge, Mu Chu said to the wretched man while looking at the stage at the same time. The boss, Lao Yan, originally wanted to say something, but when he heard that this wretched man actually had such a grudge against Mu Chu, he stopped talking and narrowed his eyes and turned a deaf ear. The other awakened people in the search team had no intention of speaking. After all, they had to choose between a new awakened person and an experienced awakened person with extensive connections and strong strength. The result was already obvious. Suddenly, a voice like an oriole coming out of the valley came out from among the members of the search team. Ma-kun, are you trying to use your power for personal gain? Weilinger jumped down from the high platform and looked at the wretched man with a pair of smart eyes. I brought Mu Chu, do you want to go against me? The wretched man's whole body suddenly bulged, and his skin turned strangely purple. A thick tail was dragged out from behind, and his mouth suddenly became sharp and protruding, with a slender tongue spitting back and forth. In the blink of an eye, this wretched man called Ma-kun turned into a humanoid lizard. The lizard man narrowed his narrow red eyes and shouted at Weilinger, Weilinger, get out of here, this is none of your business. Weilinger jumped into the air with a cooing sound, her exquisite figure swung around, and a fluffy brown tail actually appeared behind her. The girl's pretty face has undergone some changes. There are a pair of shining tiger teeth on her lips, her bright eyes are like 2 crystal gems, and even a pair of small brown ears stand up on her head. Is this a cat girl? So cute. When many of the survivors present saw Weilinger's transformation, they seemed to have awakened some strange otaku attributes, and they were immediately attracted by the cuteness. Mu Chu also didn't expect that Weilinger's special ability was to transform into a cat lady. But after thinking about it, this girl's out-of-the-box temperament is indeed suitable for awakening this ability. Seeing that the Catwoman transformed by Weilinger and the lizard man transformed by the wretched man were about to confront each other, Mu Chu shook her head and stepped forward. He has no intention of competing with this kind of miscellaneous fish. Mu Chu, don't worry. Since I, Weilinger, brought you here, you will naturally join my team. When Weilinger saw Mu Chu stepping forward, she thought the latter was worried about offending others and no team was willing to accept him, so she reminded him. It seems that because of her transformation into a cat lady, Weilinger's voice has a bit of a coquettish tone. Mu Chu laughed. This young lady seemed careless, but she was actually a considerate person at heart. Mu Chu looked at the 2-meter-tall lizard man beside him and said calmly, your brother came to rob me of food first, so I punished him a little. Now you want to avenge your elder brother." The lizard man spit out the letter and made a hoarse voice, "Stop talking nonsense to me. Boy, let me tell you, in this apocalypse, fists are the most important thing." Before he finished speaking, the lizard man suddenly swung his thick tail towards Mewtwo like a poisonous whip. A huge sound broke through the air, and the strong pressure even made the air tremble. The sudden attack by the lizardmen made many awakened people, including Weilinger, unable to react. Everyone could only watch helplessly as this blow, which was enough to turn gold into rubble, was about to hit Mewtwo's flesh and blood body. Boom! With a heavy blow, the wall behind Mewtwo was shattered into rubble by the aftermath, dust flew, and smoke scattered. Some survivors who had no time to dodge were even injured by the broken rubble, causing great harm to Chew. Everyone could almost imagine that when this whip like a giant python hit Mewtwo's mortal body, there would be a scene of blood and flesh flying everywhere. But the next moment, the flying dust dissipated, and a scene that everyone expected appeared. The wall behind Mewtwo collapsed, but Mewtwo did not move at all. Mewtwo raised his arm, and what he was holding in his right hand was the lizard man's giant trunk-like tail. The new awakener actually caught the giant tail of the lizard man Ma-kun with his bare hands. "Are you kidding?" The woman in red next to Tiger Man, Lao Yan, opened her eyes wide and looked at Mewtwo, who grabbed the lizard man's tail with some disbelief. His expression was calm and he didn't seem to be struggling at all. Looking back at Ma-kun, his face is distorted and his blood vessels are bursting. He has obviously used all his strength. If I remember correctly, Ma-kun is a B-level awakener, right? The man in suit also felt a little incredible and asked Lao Yan. A solemn look appeared on Lao Yan's face. He looked at Mewtwo's indifferent face and nodded slowly. This kid is not like an ordinary awakened person who has not received professional training. Weilinger's smart cat pupils were also full of doubts. When did Mewtwo become so powerful? I remember he is not an awakener of the elemental system. The surrounding awakened people were talking a lot, and they were all frightened by Mewtwo's strange power, but the next scene made them even more stunned. Mewtwo lowered his head, with broken hair flying around, making it difficult to see his eyes. His indifferent voice could only be heard through the opening and closing of the corners of his mouth. "You are right about one thing. Whether it is in the end of the world or in the past, fists are always the biggest truth." A shocking scene happened. Mewtwo's palm actually condensed a layer of frost. As he spoke, this layer of frost extended along Mewtwo's palm to the tail of the lizard man, and then spread to the lizard man's body at lightning speed. His whole body condensed into ice cubes in an instant. Freeze. The lizard man was frozen into an ice sculpture in the blink of an eye. Everyone was shocked and speechless by this scene, but they saw that the lizard man Ma-kun had a ferocious expression, and his eyes still showed the fear before being frozen. Gulu. The sound of swallowing was heard, and the scene fell into a moment of calm. Finally, someone suddenly shouted in the crowd. "Yuan, elemental system, this person is the awakener of the elemental system." As this man shouted, many awakened people suddenly realized and looked at Mewtwo below with shocked eyes. Tiger Man, Lao Yan, was also a little shocked at this moment, and said, "It turns out to be a rare elemental awakener. Now we have found a treasure." More than that, the man in a suit echoed. With the ability to freeze Ma-kun with just a raise of his hand, he is now at least a B-level awakener, or even an A-level. Weilinger was also dumbfounded. She didn't expect that a survivor she picked up from the ruins would be so powerful. Weilinger came to Mewtwo's side in a few jumps, and looked at Mewtwo with a pair of smart eyes, her eyes filled with brilliance. "I didn't expect you to be so powerful." Regarding Weilinger's scrutiny, Mewtwo smiled calmly and explained, "I have been stuck in the supermarket before, and I don't know much about the outside world. The implication is, I have been practicing in seclusion before, and I didn't know you people outside were so weak." Weilinger, little handsome boy, your name is Mewtwo, right? At this moment, a charming voice that was very different from Weilinger came. Mewtwo turned around and saw a woman in red on the stage walking over. This woman is wearing a red cheongsam, with her fair and slender thighs under the fork. The cheongsam outlines her voluptuous figure, but it has the bulges that should be raised and the curls that should be raised, much plumper than Weilinger. The woman's face is also very charming, her smile is like a blooming rose, and a beauty mark under the corner of her eye adds a sense of charm. There is no doubt that this is a beauty, and even in this world, she would be a disaster for the country and the people. Liu Qianchen, what do you want to do? The arrival of the charming woman set off an alarm for Wei Ling, who suddenly ducked in front of Mu Chu and looked warily at the enchanting figure in front of her. That look in her eyes was like that of a female cat protecting her food, ready to explode at any moment. Don't be so nervous, Ling. I just want to ask this handsome guy named Mu Chu if he is interested in joining my team. The enchanting woman whom Wei Ling called Liu Qianchen twisted her waist like a water snake and walked towards Mu Chu, but was stopped by Wei Ling. Stop dreaming, I brought Mu Chu back to the base, and she has already joined my team. Wei Ling scolded angrily, and then looked at Mu Chu, raised her head and said, Mu Chu, don't you think so? Although it was a question, it was in an affirmative tone and showed its pointed little tiger teeth, as if it would bite you to death if you were not sure. Mu Chu nodded quickly. Compared with these unfamiliar people, following Wei Ling seems to be a good choice. Unexpectedly, Liu Qianchen still refused to give in. She walked around Wei Ling and came to Mu Chu's side, saying softly, Little handsome boy, there are many benefits to coming to my sister's side. The red lips rested next to Mu Chu's ear, and they were so charming. A pair of watery eyes stared directly at Mu Chu, which was breathtaking and fascinating. Hey, what do you want to do, Vixen? Wei Ling immediately became furious and waved her sharp cat claws to attack Liu Qianchen. Okay, Ling. Lao Yan spoke up to stop Wei Ling, and then the other awakened people came down from the stage and looked at Mu Chu with eyes filled with greed. Yes, Mu Chu read it right. The eyes of the members of the search team looking at him were full of desire called greed. What does it mean if an awakened person of the elemental system is cultivated? Even the lowest elemental system has powerful destructive power once awakened, which is several times higher than the ordinary mutation system and superpower system at the beginning. If there is a powerful elemental awakener accompanying the team, it can provide a strong survival guarantee for the entire team of awakeners. Hello, little brother, I am Wang Minglang from the survival team. Now I sincerely invite you to join our team. We can discuss the salary issues in detail. The middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes just handed Mu Chu a business card, and then extended an olive branch to Mu Chu. Immediately afterwards, Mu Chu received all kinds of invitations. Some promised huge sums of money, and were tempted by beautiful women. Some promised that Mu Chu would be given a set of real estate in a safe zone if she joined. Mu Chu, similarly, you are welcome to join my wolf warrior team. The tiger man Lao Yan also started to recruit Mu Chu. Of course, no matter what, the final choice is still yours. The survivors in the same batch as Mu Chu looked at each other, and they were left alone. Looking at Mu Chu, who was like a star holding the moon, the others all hated why they had not awakened the elemental power. Forehead. Mu Chu was surrounded by a group of awakened people, and many benefits were showered on him. In the end, he shook his head and said, Thank you for your kindness. I'd better join Wei Ling's team. Seeing this, everyone could only return with regret. Only the Cheongsam beauty Liu Qianchen still refused to let go, wrapping around Mu Chu's waist like a water snake, and said softly, Are you really not thinking about it anymore? Sister, I can talk to you alone. Liu Qianchen twirled her hair and looked directly at Mu Chu with a pair of seductive eyes. The moment they looked at each other, Mu Chu was deeply involved and couldn't help but want to nod. Not good. Mu Chu quickly activated the power of the tiger talisman and calmed down the throbbing in her heart. Mu Chu looked at Liu Qianchen with calm eyes. This woman must have used a charm-type power just now to make her lose her mind. When Liu Qianchen saw Mu Chu's reaction, she realized that her charm had failed, and she immediately turned around and left. Before leaving, Liu Qianchen tapped her fair jade hand on her cinnabar-like red lips, and blew a kiss to Mu Chu from afar. Little brother, when did you change your mind? Sister, you are always welcome here. Soon, the remaining survivors also showed their own special abilities. Some powerful abilities were all divided up and absorbed by the search team. Of course, there was no elemental system as powerful as Mu Chu among the remaining people. Once the Awakener test was over, Mu Chu was hurriedly taken away by Wei Ling, unlike the other survivors who were uniformly taken away. Not bad. Mu Chu, it's not in vain that I have tried so hard to win over you. At this moment, Weilinger cancelled her transformed civet form and walked on the street like a girl next door. Judging from the way she jumped, she was obviously very happy with Mu Chu's performance today. Mu Chu expressed helplessness about this. After all, he came to this Yuhai safe zone, without help, and blindly joined a team. What if he was bullied by bad guys? Weilinger, an innocent girl, seems to be more fooled. She has too many secrets, so she should keep a lower profile. By the way, even though I was prepared that you were an awakener of the elemental system, I didn't expect you to be so powerful. Weilinger suddenly turned around, raised the corners of her mouth, and said with a smile, with your qualifications, maybe you can become the guardian of the base in the future. Guardian, Mu Chu frowned. You should know that after the apocalypse, many people awakened their superpowers after being infected with the virus, but there are no clear criteria for classifying these superpowers. So people classified all powers into different levels according to the level of energy. Weilinger raised her head and looked at Mu Chu, speaking seriously. D-level awakeners are basically the energy level of all awakeners when they first awaken their powers. After becoming A-level awakeners, they are already strong in their own right. What about those above a level? Mu Chu suddenly asked. Some time ago, the base sent a large number of personnel to capture an S-class heretic, the Fire Demon Lord. Hey, what's wrong with you? Weilinger said, seemingly noticing Mu Chu's unnaturalness. Mu Chu had a lump in her throat and said hurriedly, it's okay, just keep talking. Weilinger was a little confused, but continued, at that time, in order to capture an S-class heretic, the base paid a huge price. The elite team of more than 1,000 people and hundreds of awakened people were almost defeated. Only half of the time did he capture the Fire Demon Lord alive. The scientists originally wanted to use the S-class Fire Lord to conduct experiments, but unfortunately they let him escape in the end. Mu Chu suddenly had cold sweat dripping down his forehead. If he was discovered, wouldn't he be committing suicide? He quickly changed the subject. Then what level is beyond S level? He remembered that in the black area above the red area, there was an aura that made even the Fire Demon Lord at that time tremble. Weilinger suddenly stopped and her face looked a little solemn. What's above the S level is the destruction level. The destructive level strong man is the guardian I just told you about. If you can protect the safety of a city with one person's power, you are a guardian. Chapter 11. The guardians are all awakened ones beyond S level. Weilinger nodded and continued. Our Yuhai base now has 3 guardians. The reason why the Jade Sea safe zone can have a place in the apocalypse and recruit survivors from the surrounding areas is due to these 3 guardians. Mu Chu secretly felt lucky. Fortunately, he did not blindly become arrogant and go against the base based on his increased strength. Otherwise, the strength of the 3 destructive level demons would be too much for even his evolved Fire Demon Lord. What are the identities of these 3 guardians in the base? Mu Chu was a little curious. Weilinger was silent for a moment, with a rare gloomy look on her pretty face. The entire Yuhai base still has no clear leader. To be precise, it is not the only one. The base is now divided and controlled by 3 major forces. After the apocalypse, the bosses of the 3 forces jointly established the Yuhai safe zone, and each has destructive power in their hands. They are the real Earth Emperors of Yuhai. At the same time, in a building in the center of Yuhai's safety zone. This is a luxuriously decorated office with a level of magnificence that is rare even before the end of the world. Oh, so that elemental awakener has joined Weilinger's team. In the office, a middle-aged man with a fat body and a big belly was sitting on a mink chair, and in front of him stood a man in a suit and leather shoes. If Mu Chu were present, he would definitely recognize this person as the middle-aged man who had handed him his business card in the training ground with the intention of recruiting him. The man in the suit nodded. It seems that this awakened person was brought back from the ruins outside the city. Our people have not received any news. The fat middle-aged man was half leaning on the backrest and said thoughtfully, if I remember correctly, this Weilinger is Wei Ying's sister, right? Wei Ying is Xiao Hanyan's man, so Xiao Hanyan has another potential stock. The middle-aged man has a bloated figure, and even loose clothes cannot hide his fat belly. Only a pair of eyes shone with shrewd light, and then he waved his hands freely and said, forget it, At least I didn't fall into the hands of that madman Wang Dapeng, otherwise wouldn't he be even more lawless in the future? After saying that, the middle-aged man stood up from the mink chair, walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of the building, and squinted his shrewd eyes to look out the window. The place seemed calm and peaceful, no different from before the apocalypse. The only difference was that there were very few pedestrians on the street, and most of them were in ragged clothes and walking in a hurry. The rich man's face showed a solemn look. I don't know how long this tranquility can last. Zhang Qingwei, one of the 3 leaders of Yuhai base, was a shrewd businessman before the apocalypse, and he was very wealthy. After the apocalypse broke out, he awakened the power of treasure hunting, and used this to organize his subordinates to collect a large amount of resources. He soon became the dominant force leader. But the most terrifying of the 3 is Wang Dapeng, who is called a madman. Wei Ling'er's expression suddenly became a little strange, and she reminded Mu Chu. If you meet Wang Dapeng, it's best not to have too much contact with him. How do you say it? Mu Chu asked. He didn't understand why Wei Ling'er had such a strange reaction when Wang Dapeng was mentioned. Wei Ling'er looked around, suddenly stood up on tiptoes and whispered to Mu Chu. Wang Dapeng was an unlearned little gangster before the end of the world. When the end of the world came, he had some good luck and awakened his superpower. With his ruthless personality, he quickly gained a foothold in the apocalypse. Later, he gathered a group of gangsters around him. His strength also increased by leaps and bounds, and he soon became one of the 3 giants of Yuhai. The Ma Kun who is against you today is Wang Dapeng's subordinate. He is a cruel and crazy person. He is cruel in dealing with humans and zombies. He is also narrow-minded and will retaliate. In short, you must be careful about this person. Mu Chu nodded. If Wang Dapeng didn't cause trouble for him, he wouldn't do it for nothing. What about another one? When it came to the last leader, Wei Ling'er's tone became obviously much lighter and she said happily. The last leader of the Yuhai safe zone is Sister Hanyan. Sister Hanyan came from a military family. After the apocalypse began, she led the surviving army soldiers to rescue the survivors, and later recruited and expanded the troops among the survivors. The reason why the soldiers at Yuhai base now have these comprehensive standard equipment is all thanks to Sister Hanyan's help. Mu Chu understood. In other words, the 3 leaders each have different divisions of labor in the base and jointly establish a safe zone for survivors. Wei Ling'er nodded. Sister Hanyan organizes manpower and trains soldiers in the base, and the task of the awakened team like us is to explore the ruins and eliminate the heretics. The 2 of them walked and talked like this, and Mu Chu soon discovered that the closer to the center of the Jade Sea safety zone, the more survivors there were on the roadside. Most of them were wearing shabby clothes, and some even set up tents with some rags on the spot. These tents are full of holes and potholes, and obviously cannot provide even the most basic shelter from wind and rain, but these people still live in them happily. It was already approaching mealtime, and Mu Chu saw a stall in front of her. A group of survivors had already lined up in front of the stall, their bowls filled with rice paste-like food. Sensing Mu Chu's gaze, Wei Ling'er explained, these people are survivors who escaped from other urban areas. They have no fixed place to live and can only live in the safe zone. At this point, Wei Ling'er's tone paused before continuing, but at least, it's much safer here than in the resettlement area on the edge, isn't it? Mu Chu said nothing because after seeing these groups of humans, the cruel consciousness belonging to the fire demon lord in his body began to stir again. Eat blood, drink enough blood, eat flesh and blood alive. Swallow, swallow, eat them. Violent and bloody thoughts kept echoing in his mind, and he seemed to have seen the scene of blood and flesh splattering on the crowd in front of him. A red light flashed in Mu Chu's eyes, and he was trying his best to use the tiger talisman to suppress the anger in his heart. Wei Ling'er saw him frozen in place, staring blankly at the groups of refugees, with fine beads of sweat on his forehead, and thought Mu Chu felt compassion after seeing this scene. In order to ease the atmosphere, Wei Ling'er said with a smile, "Don't worry, maybe you will become a destructive level powerhouse in the future and eliminate the heretics around you, so that these survivors can live a good life." Mu Chu had just recovered from her violent emotions, but she didn't expect that the evolved fire demon lord's consciousness was so powerful, and the tiger talisman could only barely suppress the dark side in his heart. After hearing Wei Ling'er's words of persuasion, Mu Chu smiled and remained noncommittal. "If I don't eat them, I'm deliberately being patient, right? Wei Linger suddenly smiled. Suddenly I feel like I am an NPC in Novice Village. Mu Chu was stunned, then smiled and said, so I am a newbie who has just arrived in Novice Village. But I believe you have the potential to grow into a full-level boss. Wei Linger blinked at Mu Chu and walked forward with Mu Chu. Mu Chu looked at Wei Linger's slender figure, and couldn't help but think of the Berserk Fire Demon Lord, and murmured, I'm afraid I will be the final big boss. He didn't know that as his strength gradually increased, whether the power of a tiger charm alone could restrain the violent and bloodthirsty emotions in his body. If you cannot suppress the consciousness of the Fire Lord in your body and release the Berserk Fire Lord, then the entire base will turn into a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Mu Chu shook his head. He was a little unsure whether it was good or bad for him to stay in the human world. Soon, under the leadership of Wei Linger, Mu Chu arrived in front of a row of villas in the wealthy area of Yuhai City before the apocalypse. Wei Linger approached a two-story villa, took out the key, opened the door and walked in. Mu Chu was a little confused, but still followed in. The villa is a two-story building as a whole, with exquisite decoration inside, a high-ceiling foyer, and a wide floor-to-ceiling window on the balcony on the second floor, which can just overlook a lot in the distance. The overall decoration is not as luxurious as ordinary villas, but it is more elegant. Wei Linger took Mu Chu for a brief walk around and suddenly said, how is it? This house is pretty good, isn't it? As soon as he finished speaking, when Mu Chu was confused about what he meant, Wei Linger threw the key in her hand to Mu Chu. Here it is for you. Mu Chu was a little surprised this time. Although these properties are no longer valuable in the end of the world, this place is in a safe zone after all. Even looking at the entire Yuhai base, it is located in the golden zone in the center. It is heavily guarded and is even more precious in the end of the world. He really didn't expect that Wei Linger would give it to him so easily. Did you rob the house? Wei Linger rolled her eyes at Mu Chu, and then said, don't think too much, this is a property I owned in Yuhai before the end of the world, and now I give it to you. Mu Chu didn't expect that Wei Linger was a wealthy woman who was secretly wealthy. This property was very good in terms of location and floor plan. The price before the apocalypse would have been 7 figures at least. Does anyone who joins your team receive this kind of treatment? Mu Chu asked. What a beautiful thought. Wei Linger rolled her eyes. This is a reward for your good performance today. An awakened person of the elemental system is still worthy of my investment. Mu Chu was once again glad that she rejected the solicitation from other teams today. You must know that this eldest lady is a bit difficult to deal with. Cats with fried fur are generally vindictive. With that said, Wei Linger took out a cloth bag from her waist and handed it to Mu Chu. Mu Chu opened the bag and saw several bottle-sized white crystals inside, with a blue gem-like crystal at the bottom. Sensing Mu Chu's confused gaze, Wei Linger explained, this is the energy crystal core obtained from the mutated zombie heretic. In addition to activating the supernatural energy in the body after practicing, the method for awakeners to advance can also be to improve their supernatural abilities by absorbing these energy crystal nuclei. It's just that relying on absorbing crystal nuclei to advance is ultimately an external force. The energy efficiency absorbed is too low, and the output of crystal nuclei is still a matter of probability. The energy crystal nuclei themselves are also extremely precious. The cores produced by the lowest level zombies are white, and the color of the cores produced by higher level zombies will also change accordingly. Crystal cores can also be used as hard currency in the base, so you have to cherish them. Consider this a gift package for you as a newbie. How about it? I'm pretty competent as an NPC, right? After hearing Wei Linger's explanation, Mu Chu couldn't help but admire this maintainer of order in the base. Although there are still many survivors in this huge base who are hungry, it is really not easy to establish such a system in just 2 years after the outbreak of the apocalypse. In the past few days, you can go to the training ground to practice your abilities. In 3 days, our team will conduct a collective mission. By then, you will have met the other members of the team. Wei Linger explained to Mu Chu again, and then left the villa. Before leaving, Mu Chu asked Wei Linger if she knew where the Daishanti Entertainment Club was. He was still worried about where the system would check in next. Wei Linger looked at him with strange eyes and said, Entertainment Club. One look at Wei Ling looked like she didn't know, so Mu Chu hurriedly waved her hands away, but the former's expression looked even weirder. After Wei Ling left, Mu Chu looked at the bag of energy crystal cores in her hand. He picked up a white crystal core and did not use the ability to devour it, but instead activated the energy within his body. Soon, Mu Chu felt an energy coming out of the crystal core and flowing into his body along the palm of his hand. It's just that this energy is very small, and the improvement effect on yourself is better than nothing. Really, Mu Chu had already known in her heart that the energy gained from absorbing the crystal core was far inferior to that of swallowing it directly. Although the crystal core is said to be the source of the abilities of the infected heretics, the energy contained in it has already been used to transform their bodies. The remaining energy in the crystal core can only be said to be the few potentials hidden in the body. This is like an experience bar. There may be dozens of experience points gained from directly devouring flesh and blood essence, but if it is converted into crystal nuclei and then absorbed, there will only be a few points left. Since the crystal core can't improve much strength, it's better to keep it for currency transactions. Mu Chu put away the bag and began to look at her own small villa. Living alone in a small two-story building seemed a bit empty. Mu Chu walked along the escalator to the floor-to-ceiling balcony window on the second floor. Mu Chu looked into the distance and saw that the sun was setting and she could faintly see the skyline. There were a few faint smoke drifting in the distance. Below, there were more groups of disaster-stricken survivors receiving relief. Mu Chu could vaguely sense that there were several eyes peering towards the villa, but he paid no attention to these watchers. It's almost time to stretch your arms and legs. After saying this, Mu Chu stretched out and secretly activated the monkey talisman's ability. Suddenly a halo of light flashed in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, gradually surrounding Mu Chu. In the blink of an eye, the halo dissipated, and a bird spread its wings and flew out of the halo, while Mu Chu's figure disappeared from the spot. Yuhai Base, in a tall building. A heroic beauty in military uniform was looking through some photos in her hand and said casually to Wei Ying next to her. The elemental awakener named Mu Chu has now joined Linger's team. Wei Ying looked slightly excited and replied, "Yes, we hid the news very well before. This awakened person is extremely powerful. He defeated the B-level awakened person Ma Kun at the training ground today. This kind of potential will even increase in the future. It is possible to reach the level of destruction." After all, Mu Chu was the one he discovered first, and it was his sister who brought him back to the base. He was honored to bring back a seed-level awakener to the base. After hearing the news, the woman in military uniform did not show any joy. Instead, she pondered for a moment, looked at a white-haired man on the other side, and said, "Is there any problem with him?" The white-haired man held up the black frame and said, "According to my observations during this period, this man is quite honest. He has not been out since he was sent to his residence by Wei Linger today. He does not carry any communication equipment with him, and I don't think there are forces willing to send an awakened person with such potential to be a spy." The woman in military uniform nodded after hearing the white-haired man's analysis, and said calmly, "Continue to observe for a while, and then cancel the manpower after making sure there are no problems. After all, no matter how rare the element system is, it is still only a potential stock and does not surpass the real S level. Even if it can attract a certain amount of attention, it is nothing more." And this woman in military uniform is none other than Xiao Hanyan, one of the three giants in Yuhai Base. Xiao Hanyan asked Wei Ying and the white-haired man some questions, and suddenly seemed to realize something and said, "Is Wang Dapeng coming back soon?" When the name, Wang Dapeng, was mentioned, Wei Ying and the white-haired man were also stunned. The white-haired man reluctantly said, "It's been half a month since Captain Wang led his men to search for the ruins. Counting the days, it's really time to come back. That madman." There was a bang sound, and Wei Ying, who had always behaved maturely and steadily, slapped his palm on the table and said angrily, "Colonel, we can no longer tolerate this madman allowing his subordinates to disrupt the order of Yuhai. Since the establishment of the Yuhai safe zone, how many survivors have been bullied and oppressed by Wang Dapeng's men? Every time our people want to control it, they are violently oppressed by Wang Dapeng. The scourge of Wang Dapeng in the Yuhai base is simply more dangerous than the zombie heresy outside." Wei Ying vented his grievances in front of Xiao Hanyan, but Xiao Hanyan seemed extra calm, his handsome eyebrows slightly frowned. After a long while, Xiao Hanyan, who thought for a moment, shook his head and sighed. The Yuhai safe zone has just stabilized, now is not the time to fight with Wang Dapeng. Zhang Dewei is a greedy businessman who can't afford to do anything early. He may not be on our side by then. This world. Xiao Hanyan obviously didn't want to continue on this topic, so he asked instead, how is Miao Miao doing these days? The white-haired man replied, Miao Miao is still unwilling to communicate with others. We tried to find a few peers to contact her, but the effect was still not ideal. Xiao Hanyan's expression became a little serious at this moment. We must stabilize Miao Miao, the redemption plan is coming, we can't make any mistakes here. At dusk and sunset, the outline of the sun has gradually dropped below the horizon. In the gradually darkening sky, a bird spread its wings across the sky. Until now, Mu Chu could have an overview of the entire Jade Sea safety zone. The Yuhai safe zone is modeled on the original Yuhai base, and has expanded the territory within a certain range around it. It uses mountains as natural barriers, and in front is a thick, city wall, several meters high that has been erected by the awakened ones using supernatural powers. It's a bit like the city wall barrier in a certain giant, but it's much lower than the previous one, and can barely block the attack of ordinary zombie groups. The bird transformed by Mu Chu flapped its wings and flew high, passing through the towering buildings, and finally landed in the ruins of a city hundreds of kilometers away from the Yuhai safety zone. The bird landed on the rooftop of a building, and a halo of light flashed across. Mu Chu, dressed in black robe, stood on the eaves of the rooftop, looking down from a distance. The cracked earth is devastated, and the streets that have long been reduced to ruins are filled with zombies like walking corpses, who are roaring crazily due to hunger. The soulless and hollow eyes, the mouth that was so wide that it was dislocated revealed an endless desire for flesh and blood. The ferocious face, twisted and twitching limbs, and the old blood stains on the clothes conveyed to the deepest heart of the heart all the time, of fear. Night is coming. Compared to the scorching sun during the day, night is the time when these heretics are more active. Looking at the group of zombies roaring on the ground like wild beasts, Mu Chu shook her head. As expected, I still have no intention of getting along with these zombie-like monsters. Human society is his true destination. Call. A gust of breeze blew by, causing the black windbreaker to sway. Mu Chu stood on the eaves with a calm expression, as if the group of terrifying zombies below that made ordinary people tremble could not cause the slightest disturbance in his heart. Suddenly, Mu Chu bent down and jumped into the air, her figure turning into an afterimage in the air, as if a black shadow had fallen from a 10-story building. The black robe was fluttering, and as the blurry black figure continued to fall, Mu Chu's figure continued to expand in midair. In the blink of an eye, a ferocious monster with red skin, tangled muscles, and the body of a dragon appeared in midair. The dragon-headed monster roared, with a huge roar that shook the sky and cracked the earth, and then it hit the ground like thunder. There were several loud booms, in succession, like a thunderbolt from the blue, and a huge deep pit was instantly smashed into the ground paved with solidified asphalt. Countless zombies on the street were attracted by the thunderous roars and rumblings, and rushed toward the pit. But then, a pillar of fire erupted from the deep pit underground, as if a roaring fire dragon had risen from the ground, swallowing the sky and the earth. A group of zombies near the pit were directly burned into charcoal dregs by the fierce flames. Roar! Hong Zongdalu's roar once again shocked the whole world. After the pillar of fire dissipated, a huge monster with red skin, a dragon's head and body was looking up to the sky and roaring ferociously, standing surrounded by corpses. This terrifying monster several feet tall is the fire demon lord transformed by Mu Chu. Roar! A loud roar was like a thunderbolt from the blue, and the fire demon lord opened a pair of giant claws and grabbed a zombie on the roadside. Then, the Balrog's palm exerted force and clenched suddenly. The zombie was instantly crushed by the huge force. In an instant, blood spattered and blood mist filled the sky. Immediately afterwards, the monster-like body of the Fire Lord suddenly jumped up from the pit, and in the blink of an eye he had already reached the neighborhood where corpses were strewn. Sharp claws picked up several zombies sideways, and with a puff sound, the ground was soaked in large swaths of blood. As if being stimulated by the blood, the Fire Demon Lord's eyes were filled with red color. He opened his bloody mouth, revealing his ferocious fangs, and a ball of crimson flames instantly spurted out from his mouth. Like the dawn of dawn, a pillar of red flames several feet long instantly swallowed up everything visible in front of it, and illuminated this dim neighborhood like a lonely night lamp. Looking around, the streets were already in ruins, and the strong smell of blood permeated the entire neighborhood. But the strange thing was that the streets were surprisingly silent at this moment, leaving only the heavy breathing of the fire demon lord, and the only sound in the air. There was a strong smell of blood and the burning smell of moxibustion. The sun that is about to set on the skyline reflects the entire street into the twilight of dusk. The crimson sunlight is mixed with the bloody scene of corpses strewn in the fields, which together form a picture of killing that is unique to Mu Chu. Between the blood-colored light curtains, the blood-soaked figure of the fire demon lord was reflected in it, surrounded by broken corpses and charred bones. Laugh. Suddenly, the ground beneath the fire lord's feet suddenly cracked, and the cracked earth wrapped around the fire lord's huge body and instantly sank deep into it. The next moment, a huge centipede with a body length of more than 10 meters sprang out from the ground, spitting out dark green venom from its mouth, and at the same time, waving its sharp limbs to stab the Balrog's eyes like lightning. The red color in the fire demon lord's eyes became even darker. His body did not move at all, but he just raised his arm. There was only a clang sound, and the sharp limbs of the centipede pierced the flesh and blood of the Balrog's arm, making a strange sound of gold and iron clashing, but the limb did not advance even an inch. At the same time, two beams of fiery red laser gold light shot out from the eyes of the fire demon lord, directly piercing the dark green venom sprayed by the giant centipede, and directly shot through the centipede's mouthparts. The giant centipede let out a mournful cry, and the hooks on both sides of its body began to dance wildly. However, the fire demon lord stretched out his red palm and instantly wrapped the centipede's head. His arms exploded like blood mist, and condensed into a ball of bloody vines in an instant. Wrap the centipede's head tightly. The giant centipede began to struggle violently, and the essence in its body was continuously absorbed. Blood visible to the naked eye flowed among the bloody vines formed on its arms. Within a few breaths, this huge centipede, which was several feet long, shriveled up and was sucked into a withered state. Throwing the mummy in his hand to the ground, the fire demon lord's body swelled and he groaned. At this moment, the zombies who survived this devastating disaster in the distance felt the terrifying aura emanating from the fire lord. Their bodies, which were originally fearless, started to tremble, and they howled unconsciously. Roar! Roar! This is the trembling from the bone marrow of low-end creatures, involuntary surrender to the superior. In an apartment in Yuhai Security Zone, a man with a wretched face and a mustache turned red and smashed the glass on the table in front of him. Hey Ma-kun, what happened today made you famous in the search team? You were actually taught a lesson by a newbie. You were really promising. A man dressed gloriously and dressed like a gangster was leaning against the wall, holding a dagger in his hand and a sarcastic smile on his face. And the man with the mustache was Ma-kun, the lizard man who was frozen by Mu Chu using his ice power in the afternoon. You know nothing. That Mu Chu is not a simple guy, he is definitely not a novice. Veins popped up on Ma-kun's forehead, and his expression looked a little ferocious. At the moment he was frozen, I could feel the murderous intent in his eyes. I almost thought I was dead. This is definitely not in the ruins. What ordinary survivors have? Come on. That Mu Chu has already surrendered to that Xiao Hanyan, and an awakened elementalist must not be treated like a treasure. The gangster wielded a knife with an expression on his face. Somewhat disdainful. Wait, I must find this place back. Counting the days, it's time for Boss Wang to come back. Boss Shangbi will also be very interested in an awakener of the ice element. Ma-kun suddenly laughed, stretched out his tongue and licked his lips, a glimmer of light appeared in his eyes. Late at night, the evening wind blew through the silent and deserted city ruins, and the stars in the night sky were shining with silver light. A crescent moon was shining in the sky, dimly illuminating Mu Chu, who was sitting on the top of a row of tall buildings. At this time, Mu Chu had returned to human form, and the clothes on her upper body had burst during the transformation. Mu Chu was seen sitting on the roof of a dozen-story building, with her legs dangling in the air, wearing a black windbreaker, and her naked upper body vaguely revealing her strong abdominal muscles. After wiping the blood on another yellow crystal core in his hand, Mu Chu threw it into a bag full of crystal cores. Chu turned her gaze to the dense group of zombies below. The low-end zombies are irrational and rely on instinct to search for prey like hungry beasts in the dark night. The whining and roaring sounds from their throats from time to time form a concerto unique to the Walking Dead in this long night. Sure enough, it's too hard for me to associate with these walking zombies. Looking at the civilized society below that was completely dehumanized, Chu shook her head. In comparison, Yuhai Safe Zone is like a paradise on Earth. I couldn't help but feel a slight sense of appreciation for the leadership of the Yuhai Safety Zone. To re-establish a long-lost social order, even if it is only a short-term construction, this process must be extremely difficult. Tonight's massacre was more like a hunting game for Chu, not only to familiarize himself with the newly acquired abilities and use them flexibly, but also to indulge the dark side of the Fire Demon Lord in his body. As the saying goes, it's better to block than to open up. After a night of carnival feast, the violent mood of the Fire Demon Lord has obviously eased a lot, and he has calmed down without using the suppression ability of the Tiger Talisman. This situation is like that of a child who goes to bed when he is full. After all, I ate dozens of heretics tonight. It should be enough for Balrog to digest them for a while. Chu looked up at the moon and suddenly felt that the dark world below had become a little boring. Standing up, the black robe she was wearing fluttered. Chu flew up, stood in the air, looked at the boundary of the Jade Sea Safety Zone in the distance and said, "It's almost time to go back." The first ray of sunlight in the morning shone through the window. Chu slowly opened her eyes and stood up from Simon's thick mattress. Opening the expensive silk curtains, Chu stood in front of a person-high transparent floor-to-ceiling window on the second floor of the villa. Outside the window was bright and warm sunshine. To be honest, this was Chu's first time staying in such a high-end villa. Looking at the wisps of sunshine outside the window, Chu couldn't help but sigh. At least in terms of maintaining order, the senior officials of the Yuhai Safety Zone have done their best. Just from the surface, it is difficult to tell that this is a terrifying apocalypse where zombies are everywhere and heretics are rampant. After the last lesson, Chu no longer dared to use the Sheep Talisman's ability to leave the body to spy on the base. After all, his ability is still weak in the soul field. God knows there are other awakened people in the base who are good at the soul field. Ever since she learned that there were 3 destructive level awakeners in the base, Chu understood the principle of being a human, in a low-key manner, and secretly warned herself not to be so reckless anymore. After taking a short rest, Chu put on his black windbreaker again and walked out of the villa area. Survivors in the safety zone currently have 2 ways of eating. One is the relief food that ordinary people can receive, but this food is usually based on some expired food and rice porridge soup made with wild vegetables and old grains. It is difficult to even have enough food and clothing, let alone any nutrition at all. Awakened ones with some strength will use the crystal nuclei obtained by hunting in the ruins to exchange for some canned hams before the end of the world. This is already a quite luxurious food in the end of the world. Nowadays, crystal cores have long replaced the currency before the end of the world. Because of their special functions, they are widely traded in the circle of awakened people. In the world of survivors, just a few white crystal cores are a huge sum of money, enough to make a family rich. I won't have to worry about food and drink for a few days. The 2-story villa that Weilinger gave to Chu belongs to the classic wealthy area in the Yuhai Safe Zone, and is basically populated by post-apocalyptic awakened people. The original residents of the villa have either turned into irrational zombies, or transferred the house for a few good meals. This is the change of money and power after the end of the world. The sudden outbreak of the doomsday virus has caused earth-shaking changes in people with different identities in the past. Perhaps in the eyes of some people, this doomsday disaster has caused those destined to be ordinary people to embark on the road to becoming kings. When I came to a stall on the roadside, the stall owner was a young man with shabby clothes, dark skin, and scars on his face. Although he is a bit dusty, he looks strong and full of heaven. It is obvious that he is also an awakened person with supernatural powers. The stalls sell a variety of things, including canned beef found in the ruins, self-heating hot pot, instant noodles, weapons like daggers and knives, and even some brand-name clothes. It was obvious that this awakened person also followed the team to search for resources from the ruins, and then returned to the Jade Sea safe zone to trade goods. Miu Chu looked through it briefly, picked out food such as ham bread, and took out a dagger. She asked seemingly casually, "Is there a map of the surrounding areas of Yuhai City? It's best to have detailed ones. That kind of thing." The stall owner looked at Miu Chu in confusion and said, "Hey, buddy, in what age are people still using paper maps? Just tell me where you want to go. I was born and raised in Yuhai before the end of the world. I can remember any large shopping mall or supermarket, Men Chinger." After saying that, he rubbed his fingers again and looked at Miu Chu. "Of course, this information is not free. What do you think of a white crystal?" Miu Chu nodded. He didn't want to care about such a trivial matter. He just threw a few white crystal cores over and asked, "Do you know where the D&D Entertainment Club is?" The man smiled happily when he saw Miu Chu being so generous and took the crystal core. Only then did he hear Miu Chu's question. He frowned and thought for a moment. D&D Entertainment Club. After a moment, he shook his head. "Brother, we were ordinary people before the end of the world. How can we afford a club? But I do know that there are several places specifically for us awakened people to have fun. A few years ago, the women there were all young white-collar models. Their looks and figures are so beautiful. If we didn't touch each other before the end of the world, there would be no chance of meeting them. But now, have these noble goddesses become the playthings of us awakened ones?" As he said that, the stall owner's face showed a look of reminiscence and yearning. As he swallowed, something seemed to have appeared in his mind. Miu Chu coughed lightly, and the stall owner regained his composure. He smiled evilly at Miu Chu and said, "How about it, brother? Do you want me to take you there to have some fun? It's no more interesting than finding some entertainment club." Miu Chu shook her head and refused without hesitation. In this regard, he was still a bit obsessive, but not all women could catch his eye. After a moment, the young stall owner stared at a handful of white crystal cores in his hand with gleaming eyes, while Miu Chu's back had already walked far away. "It seems that I need to reserve more white crystal cores next time I hunt." Miu Chu walked on the street and looked at her empty wallet, feeling helpless. He made a serious mistake. When hunting in the ruins, he only took away the crystal nuclei of B-level and above heretics, but did not even look at the ordinary white crystals. But the most common currency in the safe zone is white crystals, because low-end zombie heretics are easy to deal with. Even stronger survivors can kill a few ordinary zombies with weapons. All white crystals are relatively easy to obtain. Much more convenient. White crystals are produced by ordinary heretics of C-level and D-level. Above the white crystals are blue crystals that are as crystal clear as sapphires. This type of blue crystal core is relatively rare in the safe zone. It can only be found among heretics above level C, and the output is still probabilistic. Recalling that there happened to be a blue crystal in the bag of crystal nuclei that Weilinger gave to her, this shows that Weilinger really paid a lot for Miu Chu. "I have a golden mountain but don't dare to take it out. Now I can feel this feeling." Miu Chu smiled bitterly. He did have a lot of high-grade crystal cores in his hands now, but once these assets were taken out, it would definitely cause an uproar. If asked about the source of the crystal core, it would be a difficult question to explain. After all, his idea was to remain in human society. If his true strength was exposed, he would inevitably go to the front line to do some dangerous tasks. There are countless hidden dangers in this apocalypse, and he doesn't want to just jump out and become cannon fodder if he has some strength. While Miu Chu was thinking, there were more pedestrians on both sides of the street, but most of them were survivors and refugees who were in a hurry and had sallow faces. They have to work in exchange for some satiating food. These labors are basically hard work similar to repairing buildings and moving goods, and the food you can get at the end of the day is pitiful. Therefore, many young and middle-aged people are eager to join the guard team in the safe zone. The daily tasks of these guards are to maintain the order of the Yuhai base, transport resources collected by the search team, expel low-level zombie heretics in the surrounding area, etc. But the recruitment quota for guards is only a few thousand people, which is much less than the base's population of tens of thousands, but the treatment is extremely generous. The remuneration of a guard is enough to feed and clothe a family of 3, and the probability of casualties is much smaller than that of a search team exploring the ruins. It is simply a coveted iron rice bowl in the apocalypse. Pedestrians on the street were busy with traffic, but no one was talking or laughing. Instead, they fell into a strange atmosphere of silence. The expressions on everyone's faces were full of melancholy and confusion about the future. Miu Chu couldn't help but feel a little emotional when she saw this scene. The distinction between the rich and the poor is an unchanging principle no matter what era, and now the standard of measurement has only changed from the previous money and power to the strength of the awakened person's abilities. Just when Miu Chu lamented the hardships of the world, a survivor passed him by. But just in this moment of rubbing shoulders, the survivor suddenly bumped into his shoulder. Miu Chu subconsciously threw out her hand and hit the person. The survivor was instantly thrown away. Then it was whipped away at a jaw-dropping speed, and finally hit an abandoned telephone pole aside. Survivors passing by were frightened by this scene, but they heard the one who was thrown away lying on the ground and began to wail violently, and his body paralyzed on the ground was also shaking non-stop. Awakened people hit people. Suddenly, a voice came from somewhere in the crowd, and then similar voices began to come one after another. This person actually violated the regulations of the safe zone and used his status as an awakened person to commit violence in public. Lawless. Where is Yuhai's law enforcement team? Many of the survivors who were watching looked at each other, staring at Miu Chu with anger, fear, envy, and at the same time a bit of pity. You must know that the Yuhai safe zone is one of the few survivor bases that still maintains order in the entire apocalypse, and it has a law enforcement team dedicated to maintaining order. Among the many laws used to maintain order, the most strictly prohibited is for awakened people to attack ordinary people without supernatural powers. There are even cases where awakened people attack ordinary people, and the awakened people who take action are eventually kicked out of the base. Everyone looked sympathetically at the survivor who fell to the ground, but no one dared to step forward to ask about the situation. At the same time, many people looked in the direction of Miu Chu to watch the fun. When the law enforcement team arrives, this awakened person will probably suffer a lot. Among the crowd, Ma Kun, who had a mustache and a slightly wretched appearance, was looking at the scene in front of him with a sinister smile on his face. All of this was planned by him, including the injured survivor and the booing crowd, who were naturally his subordinates. Originally, according to his plan, his younger brother had a dispute with Miu Chu and caused a conflict. If Miu Chu surrenders, that cowardly and bully awakened person will be extremely easy to deal with in this apocalyptic world. He has a way to discredit Miu Chu the next day and make him unable to survive in the entire safe zone, When the time comes, even that woman Xiao Hanyan won't be able to protect him. But who would have thought that before his men hit Miu Chu, he slapped his men and sent his men flying several meters away, which really surprised Ma Kun. This guy reacts too quickly, doesn't he? That's fine, let's see what this kid will do if things get too big. Ma Kun smiled evilly and remained calm in the crowd. Miu Chu, who was surrounded by everyone, had no reaction. She just recalled the subconscious reaction of her body when she was hit, and immediately felt that something was wrong. Looking at the survivor who was groaning on the ground, he saw that he was taking in less air and outgoing more air. Was he being plotted against? Several names quickly emerged in Miu Chu's mind, but there was only one person he had offended the most since entering Yuhai base, that lizard man Ma Kun. Not only did he make his brother permanently disabled, but he taught Ma Kun a lesson at the training ground that time, completely disgracing this veteran awakener. According to Wei Ling, Ma Kun and his boss Wang Sanpang were both determined to seek revenge, but they didn't expect revenge to come so quickly. So Miu Chu ignored the angry survivors lying on the ground and the eyes of the people around them, and scanned the crowd. Soon, he discovered the unique-looking Ma Kun among the crowd. Ma Kun was also stunned when he noticed Miu Chu's indifferent eyes. However, he quickly reacted and looked at her with a sarcastic look without fear, as if he was watching the fun. Before Miu Chu could make any move, a burst of noise suddenly came from outside the crowd, and soon a corridor appeared in the circle surrounded by survivors. A group of people wearing dark black uniforms and a blue eagle-shaped badge on their chests walked out. At the head was a man in his 30s or 40s, wearing a hat and with a resolute face. As soon as Feng led the team and walked among the crowd, he took a look at the survivor lying on the ground, then looked at Miu Chu, then looked around and asked, "What happened?" Ma Kun walked up to the man at some point and said in the man's ear, "Captain Lee, it's like this. This new awakened person is arrogant because a survivor accidentally bumped into him, in front of the public. I will beat this survivor seriously. Do you think this despicable awakened person who is arrogant just because he has superpowers should be detained and taught a lesson?" Ma Kun's attitude was respectful and he seemed to be very afraid of Captain Lee. It seems that this team in black is what everyone calls the law enforcement team. Mu Chu secretly sensed that the supernatural energy in Captain Lee's body had actually reached a level. After Captain Lee heard Ma Kun's exaggerated remarks, he frowned but didn't say anything. He just led the law enforcement team members behind him to check the survivors' injuries. After some investigation, a young man in the team said to the leader, "Captain Lee, his waist hit the telephone pole directly, and the bones in his vertebrae were instantly broken. Even if his lower body is cured, he will probably have to spend time in a wheelchair." Already. Hearing these words, all the survivors watching were silent. In this cannibalistic apocalypse, what does it mean to be partially disabled? I can't exercise, I can't even do the most basic physical work, and I'm afraid I need someone to take care of the most basic daily living. Doesn't this directly sentence the man lying on the ground to death? After hearing this, Captain Lee glanced at the man on the ground, then walked up to Mu Chu and said, "No matter what happens between you, come with us first. Come with us. You can give us a reasonable explanation for what happened." The many survivors who were watching shook their heads and sighed when they saw this scene. A good awakened person should have a bright future. After this incident, his reputation in the Jade Sea safe zone was ruined. But what Mu Chu said next made everyone present stunned. Mu Chu's lips opened and closed, and 3 words came out of his mouth without any emotion. "I refuse." As soon as these words came out, everyone present was stunned. This is the law enforcement team that is in charge of order in the Yuhai security zone and is committed to its mission. It was established specifically to punish the awakened people who violated the order. In the past, many awakened people relied on their powerful abilities to try to defy the law enforcement team, but in the end they were either kicked out of the Yuhai base or died. This boy is really courageous. Newborn calves are not afraid of tigers. Ma Kun, standing next to Captain Lee, looked at Mu Chu Gujing Wubo's eyes and couldn't help but feel a little secretly happy. After offending someone from the law enforcement team, this kid really can't survive in Yuhai. Hearing Mu Chu's plain words, it seemed as if the person who seriously injured the survivor was not him. Captain Lee frowned. This is the most difficult situation during mission execution. The awakened rebel against instructions and violate order. Captain Lee looked at Mu Chu with a slightly unkind look. "Young man, everyone makes mistakes sometimes. Having superpowers is not something you can use to be arrogant and domineering. Now you still have a chance to redeem yourself. Considering that you are a newcomer, the punishment given to you will not be too excessive." Soon, Captain Lee stopped talking and stopped persuading. Because he found that Mu Chu's attention was not on him at all. Mu Chu looked at Ma Kun behind Captain Lee with her deep pupils, and said indifferently, "Is this all your methods? It seems that the lesson I taught you last time was not enough." For a moment, Ma Kun felt like he was being stared at by the bloodthirsty eyes of a ferocious beast, like a thorn in his back. The feeling of being frozen and about to die that day came back again, and his body froze almost subconsciously. What are you going to do?" Cold sweat broke out on Ma Kun's forehead, but when he remembered that he was surrounded by people from the law enforcement team, he was also a dignified B-level awakened person. "MD, I'm afraid of a newbie." After coming back to his senses, Ma Kun summoned up his courage again and said with a gloomy smile to Mu Chu, "Last time I just accidentally got into your way. What happened? You still want to make gestures with me? It seems that if you don't let a newcomer like you see the power of my seniors, you really don't know how high the sky is." After saying this, Ma Kun's eyes turned red and his skin color gradually turned blue and black. This was the rhythm of transforming into a lizard man. Enough. Captain Lee's eyes were so sharp that Ma Kun was so frightened that his beard trembled and he returned to his original shape. Then he looked at Mu Chu indifferently and said to the law enforcement team members beside him, "Take him back for interrogation, and send the wounded person to the medical team." Just as Captain Lee was giving instructions, there was another burst of noise from the crowd. As soon as Mu Chu heard Captain Lee's order, her eyes turned cold at first, but then she seemed to sense something, and her eyes were attracted to the crowd. I saw a long-haired beauty wearing blue jeans and a white coat walking in from the surrounding survivors. When I first saw this woman, she had long, glossy black hair and a plump figure. Even though her figure was covered by a white coat, she could still see it clearly. She was holding a bag in her hand, and she walked suddenly as if she was before the end of the world. Urban beauty. But no one will look down upon this beauty in beautiful clothes, because in this apocalyptic world, there can still be a woman dressed like this, either because she is powerful or she has the support of a powerful awakener behind her. The beautiful woman came to Captain Lee, frowned and asked, "Amber Lee, what's going on?" As soon as Captain Lee saw this woman, he hurriedly said, "It turns out to be Dr. Liu. You're here just in time. Come and take a look at this survivor's injuries." When Lee Amber saw the beauty in beautiful clothes, he seemed to see a savior and hurriedly explained the situation at the scene briefly. After hearing what Lee Anbai said, Dr. Liu first glanced at Mu Chu, and then quickly rushed to the survivor who collapsed on the ground. He was seen leaning over and bending his knees, and his curvy body curves were clearly visible. The familiar figure took out a pair of white gloves from the satchel around his waist, and then began to examine the injured person with a shattered lumbar spine. While Dr. Liu was inspecting it, the survivors around him seemed to be alive and began to talk one after another. "It's concubine Liu Qing, Dr. Liu. She is the living bodhisattva of our Yuhai safe zone. Drive Liu was a doctoral student at Yuhai Medical University before the end of the world. He has always been a goddess-level figure. Great, with Dr. Liu here, the injured person should have no problem surviving." Amid the cheers of the crowd, concubine Liu Qing, who was wearing a white coat and was regarded as a goddess by many survivors, did not dare to slack off at all. Fine cold sweat appeared on the snow-white goose neck. Liu Qingfei looked at the waist of the injured person, frowned slightly, and then stretched out her white arms. I saw a green bandage appear on the jade hand, and then it turned into a bandage glowing with emerald green light. The green bandage floated and rotated in the air, and under the command of Liu Qingfei's wave of arms, it was directly wrapped around the survivor's lumbar spine. Dots of fluorescence suddenly began to spread around the waist as the bandage was wrapped at a speed visible to the naked eye. The survivor also let out a few faint audible moans. But anyone with a discerning eye can see that this man's condition is much better than when he fell to the ground just now. Soon, dozens of breaths passed, and the man's condition gradually stabilized, and the emerald green bandage controlled by Liu Qingfei also dissipated in the air. Concubine Liu Qing looked pale, and even beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. She stood up and said to Lee Amber, "His condition has stabilized for the time being, but he still needs to rest for a while. I will diagnose and treat him again in a week, which should ensure that he will not have problems walking in the future." Great. Dr. Liu is indeed as rumored, treating both the awakened and us ordinary people equally. She is so beautiful and has such a kind heart. I wonder which kid will be so lucky to marry Dr. Liu in the future. Don't have such wishful thinking. Dr. Liu already has a fiancé, but she just got separated from her husband after the apocalypse. The survivors who were watching were as if their chests had been exploded, as if the man lying on the ground was their relative, and they all looked at Liu Qingfei with admiration. Facing the admiring looks of everyone, Liu Qingfei didn't care and walked straight to Mu Chu. Mu Chu was also observing concubine Liu Qing at this time. "Well, you have a charming face, elegant temperament, and proud figure. You must at least have Ahem. What really surprised him was that the supernatural energy in this woman's body actually reached a level. This was the first time he had seen a female awakener with such high supernatural energy in Yuhai. This woman's identity is not simple. While Mu Chu was thinking about it, concubine Liu Qing frowned and suddenly pointed at Mu Chu and asked, "Do you think this is interesting?" Mu Chu was startled, but concubine Liu Qing's red lips parted slightly, and her tone of voice was extremely cold. As an awakened person with superpowers, not to mention praying for the people, eradicating heretics, and becoming a world-class hero, you must at least be worthy of your skills and your own conscience. You have great abilities, but you use them to bully humans like you, just because they are weaker than you. I have seen too many people like you in this last world, who are selfish and insensitive. He takes pride in bullying the weak, but he is afraid to avoid danger and runs faster than anyone else. People like you don't deserve to have this kind of superpower." Concubine Lu Qing's sonorous and powerful screams resounded throughout the audience. For a moment, everyone fell silent. Good. Well said. The surrounding survivors were instantly aroused by these preaching words, and their expressions were completely different from the numbness just now. Instead, they all had indignant expressions on their faces, and they all became angry. This kind of person doesn't deserve to have superpowers at all. Get out of the Yuhai safe zone. You don't deserve to be here. First a few people took the lead, and then the crowd's emotions were instantly ignited. As if to vent the resentment that had been suppressed and accumulated during this period, the overwhelming curses hit Mu Chu like thunder on the ground. When Ma Kun saw this scene, although it was somewhat different from his original plan, the effect was undoubtedly better. I didn't expect concubine Lu Qing to come at this time, but she just happened to help me. With the help of this fool, Mu Chu's reputation is completely ruined. Ma Kun wished that Mu Chu's reputation would be discredited, so that it would be easier to deal with him. Thinking of this, Ma Kun looked at Mu Chu with a sarcastic smile on his face. Countless abuses and accusations came like a wave. Ordinary people might defend themselves or go crazy when being criticized, but Mu Chu, who was in the whirlpool, seemed particularly calm. The power of the tiger talisman brought him absolute neutrality and peace. Hee. Suddenly, the corners of Mu Chu's mouth raised into a strange smile. The sound is not loud, but it can be heard clearly by everyone present. With countless hostile eyes staring at him and his ears filled with ridicules and curses, how could this man still laugh? Could it be that you were really crazy? Everyone was puzzled. Even concubine Lu Qing, who was the first to bear the brunt, frowned slightly, puzzled by what he meant. The sounds around him gradually dropped, but Mu Chu's laughter became more intense. In the end, the whole place was filled with Mu Chu's slightly sarcastic laughter. Mu Chu looked at concubine Lu Qing with a hint of amusement in her eyes. This kind of gaze made concubine Lu Qing feel very uncomfortable, and she only felt a chill in her bones. She had a vague premonition. Mu Chu's laughter stopped. You're right, you have power. You can indeed do whatever you want. Suddenly, a cold light flashed in Mu Chu's eyes. Mu Chu waved his right arm, and an icy blue bolt shot out from his palm. This magnificent icy blue bolt struck through the air like thunder, directly hitting the injured survivor who fell to the ground. In an instant, the man fell into an ice cave, his whole body was frozen by the ice for an instant, and there was still an inexplicable look of horror on his face. From Mu Chu shooting out an ice blue beam, to the survivors being frozen into ice blocks, the whole process happened in the blink of an eye, and no one present could react. What are you up to? The bad premonition began to grow in her heart. Lu Qingfei stared at Mu Chu closely, with an uneasy and panicked look in her eyes for the first time. A smile appeared at the corner of Mu Chu's mouth, and her messy hair fluttered in the wind, covering his deep eyes. The next second, Mu Chu's open right palm suddenly closed. Crack! Everyone turned around when they heard the sound, and saw that the ice block that froze the survivors seemed to have been crushed by some invisible force, and was covered with cracks. Suddenly, like a mirror shattering, the huge human-shaped ice cube broke instantly. There are still broken limbs of human beings in the ice, and scarlet blood stains spread all over the ground as the ice breaks. The survivor's head was still sealed in a block of ice alone, with a look of horror on his face, and his wide-open pupils filled with fear and horror. The connection between the neck and the head was still gurgling with blood. Now, who else is going to accuse me? Mu Chu looked indifferent and glanced at the surrounding survivors. Most of the survivors still had a look of horror on their faces, and they had not yet recovered from the scene just now. The few survivors who had seen big scenes in the apocalypse also showed fear when they saw Mu Chu's horrific killing methods. They all avoided looking and did not dare to say another word. Court death. There was a sound breaking through the air, and Li Anbai arrived in front of Mu Chu in just a few moves, as if there was wind at his feet. Immediately, Li Anbai turned sideways, and the rough human palm instantly turned into the sharp claws of an eagle, piercing Mu Chu's eyes fiercely. Mu Chu snorted coldly, and also stretched out her palms into claws. The moment Li Amber's eagle claws stabbed his eyes, he clamped Li Amber's wrist tightly like a soldering iron. Before Li Amber could recover from Mu Chu's quick counterattack, he immediately felt numbness and coldness in his restrained wrist. He looked down suddenly and saw that a piece of ice had condensed on his wrist, and it quickly hit his wrist. Lee Amber blurted out, "Elemental Awakener." Before Lee Amber could say anything else, the members of the law enforcement team behind him saw that the captain was in danger. They all took out the pistols at their waists, pulled the triggers, and fired bullets at Miu Chu. Seeing this scene, Miu Chu's eyes were slightly cold, and then she clamped Lee Amber's eagle claw with her right hand. At the same time, he stretched out his left hand, and a light blue mist emerged from his palm like frost, and in an instant, it solidified into an ice wall as high as one person in front of Miu Chu. The hail of bullets hit the ice wall as if they were hitting iron sheets, causing sparks to shoot out in an instant. Occasionally, a few bullets would punch a finger-thick hole in the ice wall, but hundreds of bullets could not penetrate the ice wall, which was as tall as a person. Weird monster. Seeing the incredible scene in front of them, one of the survivors finally couldn't help but trembled. The surrounding survivors were all frightened by Miu Chu's methods, and they all retreated in fear, fearing that Miu Chu would go crazy and hurt them. At this moment, Miu Chu's right palm was still clamping Lee Amber's eagle claws, and the cold frost was still spreading along Lee Amber's eagle claws towards her arms. Suddenly, Miu Chu's figure flashed and she was in front of concubine Lu Qing in an instant. Miu Chu's eyes met Lu Qingfei's, and she could clearly see the shock and panic in her eyes. Miu Chu suddenly smiled and said, "I think it's very interesting, what about you? You can hold on to the foolish Holy Mother heart in your heart, but don't try to inflict it on other people. The law of this world is that the weak eat the strong. If you have power, you can do whatever you want, just like." As he spoke, Miu Chu paused. So, Miu Chu spread out her right hand, and a blue ice pick suddenly condensed in her palm. Miu Chu raised her arms high. The next second, the ice cone was thrown away like a thunder missile. Everyone could only vaguely see an icy blue edge suddenly flashing through the air, hitting Ma Kun's direction. In the blink of an eye, Ma Kun could not react. He could only watch helplessly as a blue light not far away continued to enlarge in his pupils. Not good. He didn't react until an ice pick as long as an arm was already close to Ma Kun's head. He tilted his body and tried to get out of the way. At the same time, he subconsciously transformed into the form of a lizard man, with his skin wrinkled and showing a strange bluish-purple color. This was already his strongest form, but he still couldn't escape this swift blow. Ma Kun narrowly avoided the critical point, but his shoulder was still pierced by the sharp ice pick. There was just a click sound, and the ice pick shattered as it penetrated Ma Kun's shoulder blade. At the same time, he saw blood flying in the air. Ma Kun was punched through the shoulder. He couldn't bear the severe pain and fell to his knees, covering his shoulder and howling. Miu Chu glanced at Ma Kun, but secretly shook her head in her heart. His ice elemental power is still at the B-level of the zombie heretic he absorbed. The reason why he was able to suppress Li Anbai, who was a B-level or even A-level awakener, was all because of his own powerful strength and rich combat experience when he transformed into the Fire Lord. But B-level powers alone are still too weak after all. No matter how many skills he has, he still seems a little powerless when facing high-level awakened ones. It seems that we need to find a way to increase the level of ice powers. Miu Chu thought to herself, then turned to look at concubine Lu Qing. Even though she was wearing a white coat, she still couldn't hide her proud figure. Her long hair was black and shiny, her face was beautiful and elegant, and she had an aura of elegance all over her body. See, it's a simple thing. I have power, so I can play with life as I please. This is the biggest truth in this apocalypse. If you don't even understand such a simple truth, I really don't know how you are alive today. The plain words were full of sarcasm, piercing concubine Lu Qing's heart like a sharp needle. A trace of anger appeared on Lu Qingfei's pale face, and she shouted, "I have nothing to say to a cold-blooded and ruthless human like you." Human. Miu Chu narrowed her eyes slightly, still smiling. He stopped being that a long time ago. Then Miu Chu raised her head and glanced at Ma Kun, who was kneeling and wailing, covering his shoulders. He didn't even bother to say anything to such a small-time minion. If Miu Chu hadn't considered his sensitive status as an awakened person and killed him rashly, which might cause dissatisfaction in the base, he would have slapped Ma Kun to death. Miu Chu looked around again at the survivors watching the excitement. At this moment, some people had been scared away by Mewtwo's bloody methods, and some of the people who stayed behind were frightened by Mewtwo's slightly smiling face and retreated one after another. It was obvious that he had a handsome face with a spring breeze-like smile, but in the eyes of everyone, he looked like an evil ghost crawling out of the abyss of hell, and they were afraid to avoid him. "My great holy mother, farewell." Mewtwo's voice was mixed with a hearty smile, and she turned her hands behind her back and walked towards the distance. And behind him was the body of the survivor that had been shattered into pieces by the ice. Lu Qingfei's pretty face turned pale with anger, but there was nothing she could do about Mewtwo. Her powers are therapeutic and not offensive. The members of the law enforcement team next to him did not intend to let him go so easily. They were about to step forward to stop him, but were stopped by a pair of eagle claws. "It's Amber Lee, Captain, him." Some members of the law enforcement team who couldn't stand Mewtwo's arrogance were confused about Lee Amber's behavior. He has never seen such an arrogant awakened person in front of the law enforcement team. Li Anbai looked at Mewtwo's back intently and said coldly, "This kid is not simple. Report it to the superiors first. An awakened person of the elemental system is still of great value to the base in training. The premise is that he can obey the command of the base." Lee Amber sighed softly, looked at the pile of corpses under the telephone pole not far away, and felt a headache again. He said to the members of the law enforcement team beside him, "Go and clean up the body." Incidents of elemental awakeners openly killing people quickly swept through the entire Jade Sea safe zone like a wave. Under the fermentation of caring people, the incident made a group of ordinary survivors panic and uneasy. They didn't know how long the order in the safe zone could be maintained. Some people even scolded the law enforcement team for their inaction, publicly shielding him because he was a rare elemental awakener. Just as rumors were swirling outside, Xiao Hanyan also received news. The man wearing white clothes and glasses pushed open the door and said to Xiao Hanyan in the office, "It has been found out that the survivor killed by Mewtwo was a gangster before his death, but he was Ma Kun's subordinate. This person often uses violent means to collect property from surrounding survivors. The law enforcement team has taught him many times, but because he has Ma Kun behind him, he still refuses to accept discipline." A map was spread out on the table in front of Xiao Hanyan. Listening to the bespectacled man's report, Xiao Hanyan looked at the marks on the map. Hearing this, Xiao Hanyan raised his head and said, "So, what happened this time? Was Ma Kun secretly doing something?" The man in glasses nodded. "It is reported that it was Mewtwo who defeated Ma Kun in the training ground that day." Xiao Hanyan's frosty face finally showed a touch of emotion. "At this point, you are still provoking internal strife for your own selfish desires. Do you really want to completely destroy human society and get along with those zombies and beasts? Major, do you want someone from the law enforcement team to teach Ma Kun a lesson?" The man with glasses suggested. Xiao Hanyan shook his head. "Wang Dapeng is coming back soon. If his people are touched at this juncture, there is no telling how he will react. Besides, Mewtwo did go too far this time, defying the order in the base and openly killing people. This is a fact that cannot be ignored." Xiao Hanyan pondered for a moment and immediately issued the order with her resolute attitude. "Let the law enforcement team strengthen patrols. We will never allow a second incident of awakened people to hurt people. We must do our best to block the spread of this news." Ma Kun sent someone to remind him that although the base is short of manpower, there is definitely no shortage of B-level awakeners. There was no expression on Xiao Hanyan's cold face, only a cold light seemed to flash through his eyes. Whether he wants to continue living his good life in the base or survive in the apocalypse outside, it's his own choice. And this Mewtwo, since he is under Ling let Ling go over and make him be more honest. In addition, more manpower will be sent to monitor him. If he does anything that violates order again, even if he is an elemental awakener with great potential, there will be no place for him in the Jade Sea base. Xiao Hanyan issued a series of orders decisively and sharply, which was her usual style. The man with glasses took it for granted and nodded, "Yes." At the same time, in an office in a high-rise building in the center of Yuhai's safety zone, a middle-aged man with a plump body and a rich face sat on a mink chair and listened to the rumors brought by his subordinates. This person is none other than another leader in Yuhai base, Zhang Qingwei, who has the ability to detect treasures. After hearing what Mu Chu did, Zhang Qingwei was not angry. Instead, he laughed and said, "It seems that this little brother is still very energetic. It's interesting, but I don't know how Wang Dapeng will react when he comes back and finds out that his subordinates have been bullied. After all, he is a destructive level elemental awakener." At this time, one of his subordinates handed a map in his hand to Zhang Qing. "Chairman, this is the map sent by Major Xiao. The next search team is about to set off. Please mark the location of the resources." Zhang Qingwei did not speak, but closed his eyes after taking the map. He suddenly raised his arm, stretched out his index finger and dipped it in the ink on the side. Suddenly a golden halo appeared on Zhang Qingwei's broad forehead. An invisible energy began to flow around Zhang Qingwei's plump body. The men beside him were amazed. This is Zhang Qingwei's powerful ability that has established a foundation in the apocalypse. Super Power System, Treasure Hunt. The true power of this power lies not in its destructive power, but in its amazing supporting abilities. Zhang Qingwei can rely on his treasure hunting ability to quickly identify the location of the resource he is looking for, and can even be precise to the specific coordinates on the map. What's even more terrifying is that this ability can not only locate the location of food and treasures, but can even locate the coordinates of some zombies and heretical monsters. Of course, this ability will consume more as the level of the target is higher. At least powerful existences like S-class are not something Zhang Qingwei can perceive at will. With this superpower, Zhang Qingwei collected countless resources at the beginning of the apocalypse, and his people also used his superpower to seek good fortune and avoid disaster many times, and turned danger into safety. Zhang Qingwei's eyes were closed, but he seemed to see something. His ink-stained fingers were pulled by an invisible energy, and ink marks were lit at several locations on the map. A few minutes later, Zhang Qingwei paused while writing on the map. Zhang Qingwei opened his eyes suddenly, and then retracted his fingers from the map. Handing the map to his subordinates, Zhang Qingwei said, "The locations of several A-level heretics discovered so far have been marked on the map, but we do not rule out the possibility that these monsters have been active in recent days." The subordinate nodded and suggested, "Due to the matter of the elemental awakeners, the situation in the base is a bit chaotic. Do we need our people to stabilize the situation?" Zhang Qingwei waved his hand. "Xiao Hanyan is enough to settle this matter. I don't want to get involved in anything anymore, so let's let Xiao Yedu fight with that lunatic Wang Dapeng." After receiving the order, his subordinate said, "Chairman, we have recently found several surviving female students around Yuhai University. Look." Ahem. Zhang Qingwei suddenly coughed twice, but his face was still serious. "Send them to me tonight, and I will assign them jobs in the base." Mu Chu was awakened by a rapid knock on the door. The room where Mu Chu lives is located on the second floor of the villa. It can wake up Mu Chu on the first floor, which shows how powerful the knocker is. Rubbing her groggy eyes, Mu Chu slowly opened the door. What came into view was Wei Linger's delicate figure with her hands on her hips, and a scowl on her pretty face. It looks so much like a kitten with fried hair. Mu Chu was stunned. If he remembered correctly, the search team's mission should be tomorrow, right? When Wei Linger saw Mu Chu opening the door, she immediately rushed in angrily, revealing a pair of sharp little tiger teeth, pointing at Mu Chu and saying, "Do you know how much trouble you have caused?" After saying that, she noticed that Mu Chu was sleepy and looked like she hadn't woken up. "You still have time to sleep here." Mu Chu was confused, took a breath and asked, "What happened?" In fact, he already had a guess in his mind. As expected, Wei Linger said angrily, "The fact that you openly killed a survivor today caused an uproar among the people in the safe zone. How long has it been since the awakened ones dared to openly violate the order in the base? There are even many awakened people who are proposing to drive you out of the base. What happened today really gave Sister Hanyan a headache. Do you know how much effort it takes to suppress this matter? As your captain, I also have a list of responsibilities that I cannot shirk. Well, Mu Chu, I brought you into Jade Sea, and this is how you repay me." Being scolded by the eldest lady, Mu Chu was stunned. "Are you here to ask questions?" The next moment, the eldest lady pursed her lips and said angrily, "If you want to kill someone, at least find a secluded place and kill him quietly. You killed people openly and openly. Isn't this just a matter of fact? Mu Chu laughed. It turned out that Wei Linger was angry about this. Wei Linger flashed her fangs and gritted her teeth, as if she hated iron for not becoming steel. Okay now, Sister Qingfei has specifically reported your situation to the superiors. You dare to provoke Sister Qingfei, you really don't know how to live or die. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.